Britain's major galleries house some of the finest collections of art to be found anywhere in the world.
But there are thousands of other artworks we know little about in the collections of smaller institutions. Over 80% of this publicly owned treasure is in storage and often uncatalogued. We don't know the name of the artist, the subject, or when and where they were painted.
The Art UK website was created to shine a light into these shadows, and now has over 200,000 paintings online. Using this database, we'll be travelling the country, seeking out potential lost masterpieces. When we find an interesting painting, I'll investigate the story behind its creation, using a meticulous process of restoration, research, and scientific analysis.
I'll be exploring the world in which these works were created, the social and historical background to the life of the artist, which gives a painting its context. But simply finding a painting is just the beginning of the trail.
This week, we've come to Oxford to uncover the story behind a portrait of a student who took his degree in 1745.
This is really good.
He studied medicine at a time when advances in the science of human anatomy relied on cutting up the cadavers of condemned murderers.
To be publicly anatomized, that was utter humiliation.
I think the picture might have been painted in Rome by one of the greatest portraitists in art history.
In Rome, the first thing they did was head to the tailor. The next thing they went to the portrait painter.
Today, it's in the collection of the Bodleian Library in Oxford. I'll be looking into the extraordinary history of this institution, which now receives 1,000 books a day.
We have 153 miles worth of storage.
In order to prove my hunch about the portrait, I need to persuade the Bodleian Library to let me borrow a painting instead of a book.
Do you know that you're not allowed to borrow the books anyway?
Oh, really?
I'm afraid so. In 1645, even Charles I had his request denied.
What did he want to borrow?
Well, funnily enough, it was a history of the world. Imagine what he might have learned if they could have just relaxed the rules a little.
Looking after us for our visit is Dana Josephson.
How do you do?
Very well, thank
Sandro,
you.
how do you do?
Dana has been cataloguing the Bodleian's extensive art collection, and he's agreed to show me around the reading rooms where the pictures hang. Looking through Art UK, there are about 320 paintings in the Bodleian's collection, and almost every single one is a portrait, mostly of very learned-looking scholars. But one of these, a picture of a certain George Oakley Aldridge, caught my attention online as it looks to be very finely painted, a cut above the rest, and a potential overlooked gem. George has been moved out of the reading rooms to the Bodleian Conservation Studio, where I can get a good look at him without disturbing anyone.
So there he is.
You found him. Thank you.
I'll leave you to it.
Okay, thanks. Well, I thought this looked good on the Art UK website, where it carried my favourite attribution, unknown artist. But in the flesh, what a superlative piece of painting. I think this is by an Italian artist called Pompeo Batoni, who is not only the owner of one of the finest names in art history, but one of the best portrait painters who ever lived. In his prime, Batoni was patronised by emperors, queens and popes, but he was particularly beloved by the British. And of the over 225 portraits that he thought to have painted throughout his life, 175 of them are of British subjects. There's barely a stately home in Britain that doesn't have one of Pompeo Batoni's pictures on its walls. Now, what do the Brits love about a Batoni portrait? Well, first of all, he was excellent at doing that hyper-real detail, things like the fur in the hat and the bright colours of the costume, and that helps make you look rich and important. But Batoni also adds an element of spontaneity and characterisation that few portraitists have ever achieved, and that's why Aldrich's face here looks so animated. His lips are pursed. He's about to embrace us in conversation, to say something witty and urbane. It's suffering from a layer of dirt and old varnish, which is slightly flattening the image. And there's a slight area here where it looks like some cheeky student has flicked his fountain pen, but I'm very excited as to what this might reveal. It could be a really, really important painting.
While Bendor has been looking at the picture collection, I've been looking into the history of the Bodleian Library. The first purpose-built reading room was in this church, St. Mary's on the High Street, and it quickly became the nucleus of the university.
Being handwritten by scribes, the books that were kept here would have been extremely valuable and consequently not that numerous. In fact, the library probably only had about 20 books, and these would have been kept chained to the walls.
100 years later, with the invention of the printing press, books suddenly became cheaper and consequently more numerous.
Shortly after that, for the first, but I'm sure not the last time, somebody said, "You're going to need a bigger library."
At the time, England was in the depths of the 100 Years' War with France and had lost a large portion of her population to the Black Death. But it was also a period when the arts and crafts flourished. In 1447, when Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, gave the university his collection of 280 books, this was the room they built to house them. This was the first library in England to have shelves along the walls, becoming the inspiration for all libraries since. Duke Humphrey's collection lasted only 60 years, though. In 1550, in an anti-Catholic purge, the books were burnt, and the room became part of the medical school. It would be another 50 years before the university replaced its library, and it was thanks to the efforts of a former fellow of Merton College, Thomas Bodley. Bodley, who gave his name to the library, refurbished the existing rooms and built elegant new ones, but it didn't come cheap.
I absolutely love the fact that Thomas owed his fortune and Oxford its library to this, pilchards. Now, Thomas wasn't a particularly wealthy man, but he had married a very rich widow, whose husband had made his fortune trading in pilchards. When Thomas retired, he devoted the pilchard fortune to giving Oxford back a library.
The Bodleian Library opened in 1602 with 2,500 books, but perhaps the most significant event in the library's history took place a few years later in 1610. Bodley entered into an arrangement with the Stationers' Hall in London that was to profoundly affect the future of his new enterprise. It became a library of legal deposit.
This meant that a copy of every book published in England had to be deposited in the library. A great way to boost your collection, but a massive headache for the future.
One of the architectural highlights of Thomas Bodley's original building is the Tower of the Orders, and 5 stories up on the top floor of this Tudor skyscraper are the records relating to the Bodleian art collection. I've ordered up some documents that I hope might cast some light on the process by which the Bodleian came into possession of the portrait of George Oakley Aldridge.
In the latest catalogue, it says that the picture was given to the university by Miss Berenson of East Retford, sister of the sitter's widow, in 1837.
So his sister-in-law gave the picture to the university?
Correct.
Right.
In the older catalogue, the first scholarly catalogue of the library's collection of portraits, it says a little bit more.
In the catalogue of 1840, this portrait is said to have been painted in Italy. It doesn't say by whom. Well, that's a start.
That's an invitation. Well, this is the actual letter offering the portrait to the university on behalf of Miss Benson, because she was very old at that time, so her neighbour was writing on her behalf.
Miss Benson, an elderly lady residing in Nottinghamshire, is disposed to present a painting of the late Dr. Aldridge. Well, that's very good of her. So we can be absolutely certain we've got a direct line back to him. We know that it's certainly of him. But still, although in this game we always talk about the importance of provenance, we don't have an attribution. And we'll have to prove it by some other way.
I hope you can.
As a first step on our journey to answer the question of who did paint the Bodleian Library's portrait of George Oakley Aldridge, we need to have the painting cleaned. And that process will take place at the studio of our picture restorer, Simon Gillespie.
This vehicle is turning left.
Caution, masterpiece approaching.
Beep, 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 beep.
Or rather, the back of the masterpiece.
Here we go. Let's have a look. Wow. Well, look at that. A grubby picture, but it looks really lovely.
Glad you like it. I know you've been waiting years for me to bring you.
A picture that's got original paint on.
What?
There's some very, very lovely points. And that fur just jumps out as somebody who really understood how to put paint on.
Should we put them on the easel?
Yeah, do that. Right.
Light?
Light, yes. Wow, look at that. That's amazing. Look at this depth. Even in this, with the grime and the dirty varnish, you can still see into that, into the sockets. This is really good.
It's going to sing like a choir of angels once you finish with it.
Yeah.
To tickle the angels' tonsils, Simon wheels in his trolley of chemical cocktails.
Right, so this is the beginning of the process, which is taking off this dirt that's sitting on the surface here.
Library dust.
Library dust, academics' aura. And you can see the soot. There's wood-burning stoves and things all around the city.
Yes, soot fires.
And that is soot. You can see that sort of black,
Goodness
sooty stuff,
me.
which is everywhere. Look at this fresh brushstrokes down here. And there's these reflections.
Well, he's already looking healthier, isn't he, our chap?
Yeah, he's been eating his apples, hasn't he?
He had a lovely pasta lunch.
Yeah, we've got a very nice condition painting. And already, look at that, the volume in here. Look at that change. So the next stage is to take off the yellow varnish, which you can still see there. You can see how discoloured it is from the white of this and the yellow on the collar.
Mm-hmm.
More stubborn than I thought. Yep, slowly, slowly. Here she goes. Look at that. That yellow varnish, nice yellow varnish, is just aged. And that's been protecting the paint. Fantastic.
What a lovely transformation.
Yeah, amazing. And look how good quality the paint is.
There seems to be some evidence of overpaint around the mouth.
Just going to see if that comes off.
But Simon's initial investigations suggest a clean, and the removal of the old varnish will reveal a fine painting hidden underneath. The crucial thing is that our sitter, who's called George Oakley Aldrich,
Oh yeah.
none of his papers link this picture to Batoni. So it's all got to be connoisseurship. And we've got to place him in Rome, of course, at the right date. So we've got a bit of work to do yet. Connoisseurship is the process of looking at other works by an artist and making comparisons of style and technique to decide who painted a picture. The next step on my quest to connect George and Pompeo Batoni is to compare our picture with 100% bona fide Batoni at the National Portrait Gallery. And I've asked 18th century paintings expert Professor Robin Simon to tell me what I should be looking for.
Wonderful picture.
This is Lord North, later to become Britain's Prime Minister, and the portrait was painted by Batoni in Rome in the 1750s, around the same time I think he painted our man, George Oakley Aldrich.
Brits loved Rome, and they loved Batoni because he had a sympathy with what made them enjoy Rome so much. It was such a moment of release. It was so exciting to get to Rome. First of all, you could buy clothes at about a quarter the price that you could in England.
So does that explain why so many Batoni portraits of Grand Tour Brits, it looks like they've just raided the fancy dress box?
It's exactly what they've done. In Rome, first thing they did was head to the tailor. The next thing they went to the portrait painter. Lots of letters home about, I've just ordered a wonderful dress and so on.
Unlike gorgeous George, Lord North was famously unattractive and was described at the time as looking like a blind trumpeter. But in other respects, I'm encouraged to see very clear similarities to our painting. That open mouth look, that sort of pursed lips, what I find so magical in this one is all the musculature around the mouth.
It's perfectly done, isn't it?
And anatomic precision.
Yes, you do get this in great portrait painters, as though they're alive. And you've put your finger on it here. This is one of the Batoni portraits where the lips are slightly parted.
Yes.
And he's just thinking, which he is, he's composing a letter. So you can see the words of the letter going through his mind almost.
Yeah.
And that's an aspect of Batoni that sets him apart, really.
Yes. Seeing this picture has been tremendously encouraging. The face, in particular, is painted using the same beautifully observed detail as our picture. And I think the partly open mouth shows an artist using exactly the same tricks to bring his sitter to life.
When George Oakley Aldrich arrived to start his degree at Oxford University in the 1740s, the Bodleian Library's status as a library of legal deposit meant they were beginning to run out of space on the original site. In the middle of the 19th century, the Bodleian took over the Radcliffe Library, but the books kept on coming, and in 1914, the millionth volume was added to the shelves. Hemmed in by heritage buildings at the very heart of the university, the Bodleian began looking avariciously at the neighbouring streets.
In 1931, a row of houses were demolished here opposite the Schools Quad on Broad Street, and the new Bodleian rose in their place, making room for 5 million books.
Designed by the architect of the traditional red telephone box, Giles Gilbert Scott, the new Bodleian burrowed several stories below street level to create an underground book bunker. For the first time in a century, there was plenty of empty space on the shelves. But by the end of the 20th century, the library was receiving 1,000 new books every day. They finally had to admit there was nowhere else to put them in Oxford. Could this be the answer? At a cost of £26 million and change, this colossal high-tech storage facility is just outside Swindon.
It's hard to imagine somewhere more of a contrast to Duke Humphrey's library.
My guide to this labyrinth of literature is Virginia Laldo Busan.
This is vast.
I like to call it a city of books because it's almost like walking about New York with such tall buildings.
The challenge they face now is getting the books into the hands of the students 30 miles away in Oxford.
If someone is ordering a book in the morning, it is very likely that they can have it in the central Bodleian building in the afternoon.
So how much space have you got here?
We have 153 miles worth of storage, and we've filled this amount of space with now 10.5 million items.
And how long until this space is full?
We estimate that about 12 years
Okay.
until we need a new building.
It's extraordinary to think this all began 700 years ago with 20 books chained to a church wall.
To understand a painter better, you don't need to walk a mile in their shoes, but look at the places they loved. And Pompeo Batoni loved Rome. As a young man, he spent his time exploring the city and drawing the ruins of classical antiquity. If he did paint our picture of George Oakley Aldrich, we can be sure it happened here, because having arrived in Rome at the age of 19, he never left. His first commission was the result of a chance meeting on a rainy morning under this arcade. In April 1732, Count Forte Gabriele Valletta was crossing the piazza here when he was caught in a sudden rain shower. Taking shelter in the arcade, he came across a young Pompeo Batoni who was engrossed in making a drawing of an ancient Roman sculpture. The Count was impressed by what he saw, and the two soon started talking. Batoni lived nearby, and the two men walked down the hill to his lodgings, where Count Gabriele could see some more of his work. The meeting was a fortuitous one for both men. The Count saw the raw power in Batoni's art, and he gave him his first commission that very afternoon. It was an altarpiece for this church, San Gregorio al Cielo, and it quickly got Batoni noticed. In a very short time, he became the hottest painter of religious pictures in Rome, and he soon caught the attention of the Pope. The sort of large-scale religious pictures that he excelled at were normally among the most prestigious and well-paid work any artist could ever aspire to. But to Batoni, it all came so easily, and at the age of just 34, he received his first papal commission for a colossal picture to go here at the Palazzo Quirinale. This was the Pope's official residence in Batoni's time. And this is the picture he painted. Christ presenting the keys of heaven to St. Peter. But his first commission from the most important man in town didn't go smoothly. You see, Batoni had a bit of a problem. He was a perfectionist. Such was his attention to detail that he struggled to see when his pictures were finished, and he was reluctant to let them go out for delivery to the client, even when the client was the Pope. It took him 2 years to finish his first papal commission, despite continual complaints from His Holiness. But in the end, the picture was a hit, and more work for the Pope soon followed.
It's fascinating to think that Pompeo Batoni was studying anatomy in Rome by looking at antique statues, whilst at the same time George Oakley Aldrich was studying anatomy in Oxford by dissecting human corpses. This gruesome business was an essential part of every doctor's training, but it was a constant challenge for the university medical schools.
Finding somewhere to study anatomy had never really been a problem. The tricky issue was finding the dead bodies to cut up.
There was a widespread belief that bodies that had been dismembered could not be resurrected and thus get into heaven. But this was not thought to be a problem for condemned murderers. They were plainly going to hell anyway. Public executions took place here, on the green between the prison and Oxford Castle, and they were the main source of dead bodies.
In 1636, Charles I granted a charter allowing the corpses of any criminals executed within 21 miles of the city to be used for dissection.
A public hanging always drew a lively crowd. But now the families of the condemned gathered at the foot of the gallows in competition with the officers of the university, who had come to claim their cadaver, both groups waiting for the last signs of life.
Once the body was pronounced dead, it wasn't unusual to see fights break out between the university officers and the families, and this sort of unholy tug of war over the bodies commenced.
This is Oxford's Museum of the History of Science. They have some pretty gruesome-looking tools of the anatomist's trade. But it seems dissection was intended to add a further terror to the murderer's punishment.
To be hanged was bad enough. To be publicly anatomized, that was utter humiliation. You know, your beloved, whoever it was, who had done, let's say, killed somebody, on the dissecting table, cut up by the surgeons, people watching, that was utter disgrace.
The knowledge gained through human dissection certainly gave doctors like George Aldrich a grounding in how the body worked. But I'd wondered if it helped them make people well.
The state of anatomy would be very advanced. You would know everything about what's called the gross anatomy of the body, the anatomy that you could actually see, touch and handle. You know how the heart functioned, the brain and so on. The thing is, though, you could do very, very little to cure a sick person. You had the doctor as a scholar and a scientist in the lecture theatre with the corpse, but at the bedside, he was still on the same level as Sally the village wise woman.
It's clear that the subject of our picture, Dr. George Aldridge, was more successful than Sally the village wise woman, because we know from his will that he died a very wealthy man. In 1745, George left Oxford with a degree in medicine, while in Rome, Batoni's career was going from one triumph to another. To really leave their mark on history, there was one goal every painter would have aspired to paint an altarpiece for the mother church of the Catholic faith, St. Peter's. In 1746, Batoni got the call. This commission was to mark a watershed in Batoni's career, and in a way was indirectly responsible for our picture in Oxford. The priests in charge of the cathedral altars, the Reverenda della Fabbrica, wanted Batoni to paint a new version of a dilapidated altarpiece, an episode from the Acts of the Apostles, the fall of Simon Magus. The picture Batoni painted for them showed the moment when Simon Magus, a sorcerer who was able to fly with demonic help, is brought down to earth by the prayers of St. Peter. Ever the perfectionist, Batoni made hundreds of preparatory drawings as he worked out a highly complex composition. The picture took him 9 years to finish, and although he was paid in full, you won't find the picture in here. 9 months after the painting was delivered, the Reverenda della Fabbrica had a change of heart. The old painting was suddenly found to be in a very good state, and Batoni's new masterpiece much inferior. So what happened? I think by the time Batoni finished the picture, it was actually rather old-fashioned. It's a powerful work, but by 1755, when he finally finished it, all the Baroque flummery and dramatic emotional gestures that had been the stock in trade of this kind of painting for a century were starting to feel a bit dated. This rejection marked a dramatic change in Batoni's career. He turned away from doing religious pictures and instead took up portraiture. He already had a long list of clients who keenly admired his ability to capture a good likeness, and he found it easier to tickle the vanity of individuals than to please a committee of bickering priests. At the front of the queue were the British grand tourists who were arriving in Rome in increasing numbers. I'm sure George Oakley Aldridge would have been one of those grand tourists. It would have been very unusual for a student from Oxford University like George not to have completed his expensive education with a trip to Rome. The British affection for Rome really took off in the 18th century. Alongside the discovery of the ruins of Pompeii, more and more antique statues and carvings were dug up every year. Grand tourists were gripped by a mania for the remains of the classical past. Samuel Johnson observed at the time that all that sets us above savages comes from the shores of the Mediterranean. These new discoveries acted like a magnet to the British upper classes, keen to see what they thought was the origins of civilization. By the time the fall of Simon Magus had been rejected by the priests of St. Peter's in 1755, the trickle of visitors from Scotland, Ireland and England had turned into a flood, and Pompeo Batoni was ready to cash in. For his new British clients, he began to develop a type of portrait that was unmistakably his own. He appealed to their mania for classical artifacts by using these objects and monuments as stage props for his pictures. He not only had a knack for making his sitters look confident, but he made them look clever too. So, what makes a great Batoni portrait? What were the tricks of his trade? Well, step 1, show your subject in a suitably grand location. Top of the list, the Colosseum. Step 2, show off the sitter's clothing and accessories. If you wanted your costume to be shown in such detail or your sword to gleam as never before, then Batoni was your man. Step 3, the final magic Batoni ingredient. Place your sitter in a classical, dramatic, manly and heroic pose. This picture of Colonel William Gordon is probably the only portrait ever made to include the Colosseum and a kilt. It took so long for Batoni to paint all the detailed folds in the Huntley tartan the Colonel is wearing that he left it behind in the studio when he returned to Scotland. The statue is the goddess Roma, and Colonel Gordon is telling us that the Scots are every bit as knowledgeable about the classical past as anyone else. I'm sure the portrait was painted in the studio, but Batoni certainly came here to sketch the details of the Colosseum. And I wonder if I can find the exact spot. Aha! It must have been less perilous in the 1760s. It's amazing how realistic it is. It's not some little doodle of the Colosseum in the background. This is brick for brick accurate. And of course that is what people went to Batoni for. These paintings were the souvenir selfies of their day. And for British grand tourists like our man George Oakley Aldridge, an absolute must-have memento. When in Rome, having spent the first part of his career as the best altarpiece painter in Rome, Batoni now reinvented himself as the best portraitist in the city. He painted everyone, from the Holy Roman Emperor to the Pope. Add these eminent people to the long queue of British grand tourists like George Aldrich, and you can see why Batoni became a wealthy man. The Spanish Steps were the centre of the British community in Rome, and Batoni bought himself an impressive house nearby. Situated in the Via Bocca di Leone, the house had grand living quarters and a large studio. He lives in very great style, reported one English traveller. You know, the more I learn about Batoni, the more I admire him, especially the way he stuck to his principles. Even during the heady days of his popularity, he never abandoned his passion for perfectionism. Nor would he do deals on his prices either. When one cardinal offered him a diamond cross for a painting, Batoni said he already had a drawer full of those, and it was cash only. This self-portrait dates from this period and shows a confident and assured Batoni with the tools of his trade. There are some important clues here for us too. He's painted himself in an oval frame, just like our picture, and is wearing a fur-lined red jacket, almost identical to the one George Aldrich wears. I love the little detail, almost hidden, of a medal hanging by a ribbon inside his coat. He wanted us to know he was fated by royalty. His Grand Tour portraits, with their classical stage dressings, were a winning formula, and unlike the Baroque altarpieces that have made him famous, they were at the cutting edge of artistic fashion. Back in London, with a head full of glorious Batoni pictures, I'm paying a visit to Simon's studio, where the careful business of removing old varnish from the portrait of George is ongoing.
Welcome to our old friend.
Yes. He's got a load of graffiti on him.
A little tiny test that we carried out to see how feasible it is to take off overpaint and varnish. And those are the solvents that we've, different types of solvents, mixtures that we've used. It looks a little bit alarming, but it's quite a normal practice.
The cleaning is revealing the subtle mix of many different flesh tones the artist used to construct the face.
This little bit was painted out for some reason. I can't quite understand why.
What was painted out? The area around his lip?
Around here, yeah. There's a tiny damage there, but nothing to deserve so much overpaint.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
So how old do you think our fellow is here?
He's got to be in his 20s, maybe 30. What do you think?
Late 20s, yes, mid to late 20s. If this guy was, say, late 20s, then he's born in 1722. My math's not very good, but that means the picture would be painted around about 1750. Okay, spot on. Which would make it, incidentally, one of Batoni's very first Grand Tour portraits.
Is that right?
Yeah, this is cutting-edge stuff.
Wow. Gosh, this is really the seed of what he's doing throughout Europe, then. Everybody who goes to Rome gets himself painted by Batoni.
Indeed, and this would have been
one of the first things.
Yeah.
Gosh, isn't that what a wonderful thing to have? To be
I wonder
proud
if
of.
that sort of explains its modesty, because it's before Batoni would have got carried away and sticking, pictures of the Colosseum in the background.
Yes, absolutely.
Seeing the technique and everything for the first time, now that we've actually taken off all the dirt and varnish, is always quite a nerve-wracking moment, because it's the first opportunity I've really had to kind of focus my thoughts on who the artist is. Does what we're seeing match up with my mental image of Batoni? And now that you've opened up the fur, well, it seems to me as good as a signature, because that just looks like Batoni fur.
I don't know anybody else who does fur like that.
No.
I mean, how many colours have you got in there? You've got this white, yellow, sienna colour, dark brown.
And of course, Batoni was that, that absolute perfectionist who was obsessed with detail, and that's what we've got here.
The more we reveal of George, the more I feel he resembles Batoni's other Grand Tour paintings. My next task is to comb the archives and see if we can find any evidence that would put George Oakley Aldrich in Rome.
However noble they appeared in Batoni's portraits, British grand tourists had a poor reputation. Almost exclusively wealthy, young, male, and usually travelling unchaperoned for the first time in their lives, you can imagine what they got up to.
But I found a Grand Tour story that goes entirely against the stereotype, and it involves a really poignant portrait by Pompeo Batoni. It's housed here at the Essex Record Office in Chelmsford.
Like the painting of George Aldrich, this picture is one of Batoni's very first portraits of British subjects, but shows a different side to his character. Thomas Barrett Leonard, later to become Lord Dacre, was already in his 30s and married when he set out for Italy, and he took his wife with him. They reached Rome in 1749 and sat for a portrait by Pompeo Batoni.
So, let me introduce you to Thomas Barrett Leonard, 17th Lord Dacre, his wife Anna Maria, and their daughter Anna Barbara. The most interesting thing about the painting is that actually Anna Barbara, their daughter, had died the year before the painting was made.
Goodness.
So it's made as a memorial to her. He worked from a portrait that had been made of Anna Barbara in her lifetime by the English artist Thomas Hudson. There's a family story in the records about this portrait of her being sent over to Rome, specially for Batoni to work from. And the reason they were in Rome on the Grand Tour at all in the first place was they had gone abroad to try to escape the terrible grief that they felt.
They were feeling about her death.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's really heartbreaking. And actually their expressions are really kind of love-lorn and longing and melancholy.
I love the way Batoni has handled such a sensitive subject. This was painted in the winter of 1749, and like George Aldrich, Thomas Barrett Leonard is wearing a fur-lined jacket which Batoni has painted in his meticulous way.
Presumably the original painting that this likeness of Barbara Ann is taken from is still around?
We hope it's still out there somewhere.
You don't know?
We don't have it here.
As a measure of how deeply Thomas felt the loss of his daughter, he described her death in a family history, 28 years later.
So, this appendix here, he writes, "This Anne Barbara, our bitter day, was snatched away by a violent fever."
Her person was such as gained her favour at first sight. Her complexion of the finest white and red, she was all sweetness and goodness. She surprised and delighted everyone that talked with her, This may be thought a flattering representation of her, but in truth it is not. And therefore, at the hazard of being thought
partial by those who have not known her, I could not resist the desire I had to pay this tribute and this justice to her memory.
It's so sad. And you can see that he really adored her, that the level of detail in her description.
The Dacre portrait shows how well Batoni responded to a sensitive commission so early in his career as a portraitist. But he had an extraordinary run at the top of his profession. He was still the first artist summoned to the Quirinale Palace to paint the new Pope, Pius VI, in 1775, when he'd been working as a portraitist for 35 years. The two men became firm friends.
Pius was a cultured fellow, and it became Batoni's custom to bring his latest pictures up the hill to the Quirinale Palace for a bit of a papal inspection and a chat before the paintings were dispatched to the client. Eventually, though, the Pope would have to make the same journey in the other direction.
The elderly artist was no longer able to climb the Spanish steps to bring his work to the papal palace. So remarkably, on the evening of the 15th of October 1781, in full pomp and majesty, Pope Pius and his entourage walked down to the Via Bocca di Leone to see Batoni's latest painting in his studio.
In truth, the aging Batoni was beginning to feel the strain. A painter and pontiff chatted for about an hour, and on leaving, Batoni was offered the papal hand to kiss instead of the customary foot. It was a singular honour.
But in the 1780s, Batoni was in decline. In the last few years of his life, he was short of money. The flow of grand tourists dried up, and his eyesight was failing. A friend reported that he was not able to distinguish between the eyes and nose of a Madonna he was painting, and had given her 6 fingers. He died of a stroke in 1787 at the age of 79.
In his will, Batoni left large sums of money to his wife and children, but in fact there was nothing left to pay the bequests because he'd been found to have died in debt. The ground floor of this house, where Batoni had been visited by popes, kings and emperors, was turned by his financially destitute family into a wine bar.
Rome is still full of Batoni's work, richly animated and vividly coloured paintings in churches and palaces all over the city. But his greatest legacy are the portraits of British travellers, a potent export that sent the warmth of Italy to the cold halls and smoky drawing rooms of Britain. I'm really fizzing with excitement to return to Simon's studio and see the completed restoration of our portrait. With the remaining varnish and overpaint removed and the small damages repaired and retouched, George Oakley Aldridge is looking splendid. The obscuring soot and tobacco smoke of centuries of academic life have been removed, and George has come to life once more.
Oh, it's extraordinary. It just, woomph, comes at you, doesn't it?
It's a huge amount of, the impact is extraordinary.
Yeah, really unusual to see.
Most surprisingly, the reason for the later overpaint around his mouth is now clear.
Is that a scar?
Well, you've got it in one. I think it must be. I mean, this was all, if you remember, it was all retouched out. It was all painted out.
It was, wasn't it?
And so when we started cleaning it, we thought, hello, there's a damage, but it's not. It actually looks like scar tissue.
And you can see that it's very deliberately worked up. This is not an accident, a technique. That's there.
Yeah, you have the highlights from the light coming from the left, and the shadows around the raised scarring.
I've never ever seen that in an 18th century portrait. It makes sense, actually, for a doctor, doesn't it? He would be the one person who might want to show that. And really, who else but Batoni could pull that off with his attention to detail?
Yeah, it's lovely.
It really does feel like there's three of us here. You, me, and him. What a turn-up.
I'm now absolutely convinced our picture is by Pompeo Batoni, but there is still a missing part to our grand tour jigsaw. The question of whether George Oakley Aldrich was ever in Rome, and if so, when. If he really is in his late 20s in the portrait, then he would need to have sat to Batoni in around 1750. At the British Library, I've tracked down some letters, which I think might help us to put George in the right place at the right time.
We've got here the letters of a grand tourist called Dr. Edward Thomas. We don't know a great deal about him, but he was a prolific correspondent, and his letters are full of information about who he was seeing on his grand tour. In this one here, which is written in 1750, he writes that he spent a great deal of time in the company of two English gentlemen, Mr. Aldrich and Mr. Neil, friends of Mr. Hart's. Now, was this Mr. Aldrich our man, George Oakley Aldrich? Well, I think so, not least because Aldrich is a fairly uncommon name. But, more importantly, we know that these other people were known to Aldrich too. The Mr. Neil, well, our man George Oakley Aldrich knew many members of the Neil family. One was with him at Merton College in Oxford, and another one was a neighbour who he discusses actually in his will. But I think the clincher is this man here, Mr. Hart. That's Walter Hart, who is an Englishman on his grand tour in Rome and was also working as a tutor. And we know that he was friends with George Oakley Aldrich. Another one tells us that George was in Rome with quite a few quid to spend. So the letter says here that I had a most kind offer made me by one Mr. Aldrich of a place in his coach, as I cannot afford paying 30 crowns a month for one of my own to see the palaces and view the pictures with him. And I am now grown so expert I can point out a Guido, my favourite painter, a Titian, and a Carlo Maratti. Well, I think this is fairly compelling evidence. First of all, we can place Aldrich certainly in Rome, where Batoni was working. Secondly, we know that he had money to spend. And third, he was taking a great interest in fine art. The most important fact, I think, is that these letters put Aldrich in Rome in 1750, which is just the date we think our picture would have been made. In other words, he's certainly at the scene of the crime.
With the painting now looking radiant, it's time to invite our old friend Professor Robin Simon to cast his expert eye over it and give us his opinion.
So here we are, Robin. Here's our potential masterpiece.
Well, in technical terms, it's what we art historians call a corker. It absolutely hits you, doesn't it, straight away? It's got tremendous presence.
Yes.
Robin's attention is immediately drawn to the scarring.
That is very unusual. I mean, this is extraordinarily rare because that appears very much to be a scarring around his mouth.
This is what we couldn't understand when we were cleaning the painting. It was all covered over with retouching.
I bet it was, because really in the 18th century, to say that paintings of facial disfigurements are rare they're practically unknown.
Yeah.
Nobody does it. If you have one from dueling or something, you had a black patch or something like that. But actually just to leave it and to show it so precisely.
Yes, yes.
That's extraordinary. And yet make it such a compelling image at the same time. The immediate impression is it really must be Batoni. But it has to be a winter picture because he's wearing furs, and that's one of the things Batoni never messes up. And that's always reflected in Batoni's intensely fashionable portraits, that sense of what is right and fitting at any particular moment.
Am I right as well that he is just a master of producing fur as well?
Oh yes, I mean this hat My word, that hat. Where did you get that hat? This lovely studio cap with its little tassel and so very Italianate. It's a beautiful thing.
But just the observation of how he gets that 3 dimensions.
Isn't it astonishing?
I don't know anybody else who does that.
No.
Do you know, I think, especially hearing you talk about it, so gratifying. I think this might be my favourite picture we've ever done. Just think it's
lovely thought.
That's quite a claim, yeah. It's certainly incredibly compelling. I kind of feel a bond because of his scar. It kind of reminds me of my port wine stain, which I never expose. If I had my portrait done, I would probably have it disguised as well. So yeah.
Yes, that is interesting.
Certainly in the 18th century, if I ever have seen a scar or a disfigurement like this on a painting, it's very much overstated, like a dueling scar or something.
Absolutely.
I don't think I've ever seen a burn or something like this
No.
before. I mean, normally in this programme, we're all about taking off dirt and overpaint and revealing the true intentions of the artist. But here it seems to me that we've revealed the true nature of the man, the sitter, which is...
That is a lovely thought.
It's quite unusual.
That is a lovely
It is a
thought.
moving thought.
I would say, yes, this is by Pompeo Batoni.
The confirmation that our painting is by Pompeo Batoni is cause for celebration. A lively gathering of students, readers and library staff, including paintings archivist Dana Josephson, assembled in the scholars' room of the new Bodleian to hear what we had discovered.
Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us here this evening.
When the time came to uncover the restored portrait, we got a suitably enthusiastic response.
We've shown the painting to Professor Robin Simon, who's a great expert in British 18th century portraiture, and he has confirmed that this is indeed painted by Pompeo Batoni.
George was looking very distinguished, and the new attribution makes him one of the most important pictures in the Bodleian Library's collection.
There's a visible scar that we think is a burn, and the decision to include the scar in the painting is really something that is not normally ever seen.
Absolutely. I can't stress how unusual it is to see something like this in an 18th century portrait. In fact, I think this is actually unique. Come and have a closer look.
I asked Dana how he felt about the news.
Absolutely gorgeous, I love it. It was so easy to walk past it for years.
It's really come alive, hasn't it?
It has. It's such an unusual picture because the man's not looking at us. He's sort of looking down and very modest, and I think he was quite a self-effacing guy, perhaps because of that scar.
Yeah, I feel that now that it's been revealed, I want to know even more.
It endears him to him somehow. I mean, lots of Batoni paintings are really quite sort of pompous and look at me, and he's not saying look at me, except in a very modest kind of way.
Britain's major galleries house some of the finest collections of art to be found anywhere in the world.
But there are thousands of other artworks we know little about in the collections of smaller institutions. Over 80% of this publicly owned treasure is in storage and often uncatalogued. We don't know the name of the artist, the subject, or when and where they were painted.
The Art UK website was created to shine a light into these shadows, and now has over 200,000 paintings online. Using this database, we'll be travelling the country, seeking out potential lost masterpieces.
When we find an interesting painting, I'll investigate the story behind its creation, using a meticulous process of restoration, research, and scientific analysis.
I'll be exploring the world in which these works were created, the social and historical background to the life of the artists, which gives a painting its context. But simply finding a painting is just the beginning of the trail.
This week, we're visiting Birmingham to delve into the story behind two mysterious landscape paintings in the stores of the City Art Gallery.
Even an optimist like me can see that this picture has some condition issues.
In the most ambitious restoration job we've ever attempted, we find a whole new picture under layers of overpaint.
I've never seen a transformation quite like this.
These pictures reflect major changes in our relationship to our landscape in the 17th and 18th centuries.
I'm just going to get me dog out.
A revolution in farming led to draconian penalties for those forced off the land.
People were hung, people were publicly flogged just for catching rabbits.
While workers in the new industrial cities struggled to feed themselves.
There's a lot of unrest about not having land. And there were many people who didn't have enough money to buy food.
Our journey into the dark side of the landscape begins in the gallery's magnificent central hall, where we're met by the curator of fine art, Victoria Osborne.
This isn't too shabby. Beautiful room.
It's amazing, isn't it? It was very much designed to create a big first impression when you come into the museum.
Yeah, it's stunning.
As usual, Bendor is keen to have a look at some of the gallery's paintings that are not on public display. And we made our way through the imposing Victorian passageways to the picture store.
Bendor's getting down to work.
Let's get down to it. Here we go.
Leaving Bendor to his investigations, I took a tour with Victoria.
So Victoria, this is really a Birmingham building through and through, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, absolutely. It was designed by a Birmingham-based architect, H. Oval Thomason. It showcases Birmingham metalworking and the wonderful ironworking that you can see in this space, for example. And it was really founded on the generosity of Birmingham donors.
Perhaps the most generous of these benefactors was a man called John Feeney, a Birmingham newspaper magnate.
He left the museum £50,000, which is the equivalent of over £4 million today. And that was used to build a huge extension to the museum.
Goodness.
And the residue could be used for buying works of art for the collection.
Amongst the works of art that John Feeney Bequest Fund helped Birmingham Art Gallery to buy was a picture that I thought showed some promise when I saw it on Art UK.
Wooded Landscape Autumn Evening by Thomas Gainsborough, one of the giants of British art history. Now, he's mostly known for doing portraiture. He painted everyone from the king down. But his first love was landscapes, what he used to call landscapes. And this picture was bought as a Gainsborough in 1924, but it's since been downgraded to the status of a copy. It's supposed to be a copy of a larger finished work in a museum in California, which is called Peasants Smoking at a Cottage Door.
The California picture was painted in 1788, in the final year of Gainsborough's life, the last of a series of paintings on the theme of a family group in a woodland glade. The Birmingham picture is much more roughly painted. It has a smoking peasant and his family, but no cottage, which is very odd. Why didn't the copyist just copy the original?
So what's going on here? Well, there's the mystery. Could it in fact be that this is a sort of preparatory process by Gainsborough himself and is not just a copy? There's various things that make me wonder, because I think there are some really good bits, like I love this dog here who's a sort of energetic collie yapping up at his owner. The thing is, determining the authorship of landscapes I always find really difficult. I mean, is this here an impressionistically painted sunset, or is it just a badly painted sunset? But the thing is, I absolutely love Thomas Gainsborough, and I think this is certainly worth a closer look.
To understand Thomas Gainsborough, we need to understand how his great passion, landscape painting, was regarded during his lifetime. When Gainsborough began his training in 1740, painting the landscape was considered a very lowly branch of art, mere copying of nature. Both the English landscape and landscape paintings by English artists were not well regarded.
This is the sort of landscape that was admired, a view of the Roman countryside painted a century earlier by the Frenchman Claude Lorraine, preferably on a warm summer's evening, as we see here.
Landscapes from Northern Europe, where the weather never looked so enticing, had less appeal to English collectors. Across the Channel, the attitude was completely different. They were very keen on depictions of their countryside, and Flemish and Dutch landscape painters like Mindert Hobbema were hugely popular. According to Art UK, there was a Flemish landscape in the Birmingham collection by an unknown artist, an attribution I can't resist. But I couldn't find it in the painting store. When it was got out for me, it became clear why. Well, even an optimist like me can see that this picture has some condition issues. First of all, it's very dirty. There's a yellow and thick old varnish, and then it looks like there's some old lining paper on the side here, and obviously it's in two distinct pieces. Someone has tried to fix it with this sort of wooden lollipop on the back, and that's its given way. And then there's a great mass of black here, which looks like overpaint, and I'm guessing it's been applied to sort of cover up the split in the middle. But we do like a challenge, and actually I think the condition of this picture is not quite as bad as it looks. I also think the quality is quite good, because for the bits that we can see in, these little figures going about their daily business, they're really beautifully painted. I love them. They're so animated. And we can see all the colours and all the drawings, and they look to be in good condition. The academic term for these little figures in art history is starfage, or if you really want to be pompous about it, staffage. And we can also see the people's beasts. And I'm particularly drawn to these cows here, which are really well painted, particularly the rear end of them. Now, if there's one artist in particular who loved the back end of a cow, it was Yan Brueghel the Elder. And back in Flanders in the early 17th century, Yan Brueghel the Elder was a big name. He collaborated with the likes of Peter Paul Rubens, and along with his workshop and his son, Yan Brueghel the Younger, he painted scores of landscapes just like this. Now, if we can repair this landscape and elevate the attribution to Yan Brueghel or his studio, then that will be a significant advance. So we have two pictures to investigate. An early 17th century landscape from Flanders, which might possibly be from the studio of Yan Brueghel the Elder, and a late 18th century painting of a woodland scene with a clear connection to Thomas Gainsborough. Both share a romantic vision of life in the countryside, and I hope they're going to tell us an interesting story about how landscape painting evolved.
The Gainsborough was bought for the gallery by the John Feeney Trust, and I wanted to find out a bit more about the man behind the money. It seems that John Feeney was concerned about more than just the artistic soul of the city. His generosity extended into every aspect of Birmingham life. Birmingham Museum has a vast collection centre stuffed full of the city's ephemera, like the relics of a lost civilization. John Feeney's biographer, Carl Chin, took me to find one tiny exhibit that had a personal significance for him.
I'm quite emotional looking at these. These were the shoes, the boots that were given out to poor kids, boys and girls, from 1906 by the Christmas Tree Fund that had been set up during the time of the ownership of the Birmingham Daily Mail by John Feeney.
Aha.
My grandparents all wore these. My nan, he hated wearing them because of the stigma that was attached to them, because you were marked out as a poor kid, even in a poor street. And they were badly fitted. So our nan, like lots of other people, suffered with her feet for the rest of her life. Without these, poor kids would have been barefoot. Can you imagine that in a winter, a hard winter?
I know, it doesn't actually bear
snow on the
thinking
ground.
about, yeah.
And you know what really gets you as well is that this was the richest nation in the world.
I know.
We were the richest nation in the world, yet so many of our kids, through no fault of their own, were barefooted. So much poverty amidst so much wealth.
This local recreation ground was another beneficiary of Feeney Trust money, but his first passion was to promote the arts in the city.
He's a newspaperman. He starts the Birmingham Daily Mail as an evening newspaper for the working class. He was highly successful, but that did not pull him away from his love of the arts. And it was always tied into Birmingham because he wanted to raise the standard, the intellectual standard of the people of Birmingham. And he also wanted to emphasise its commercial prestige. And looking at art and its wide extents, that helped him do that. and he went to the Birmingham School of Design. He was a very good drawer, and throughout his life he was really interested in decorative art and industrial art. Another influence on Feeney was his wife Christina, and I think that has been overlooked to a great extent. She was the sister-in-law of John William Waterhouse, the famed Pre-Raphaelite. And when we look at Birmingham's art gallery with its stunning collection of Pre-Raphaelites, are we seeing there the influence of Christina? Because Feeney himself was crucial in bringing that collection to Birmingham.
There's certainly a great deal to thank John Feeney for. The art gallery now has the most important collection of pre-Raphaelite art in the world. Thousands of once barefoot Birmingham children were able to walk to school in winter. And we have 2 mysterious paintings to investigate.
A few days later, the pictures have arrived at the London studio of our restorer, Simon Gillespie. I'm sure he'll be pleased to see what might be a Gainsborough, and I'm looking forward to his reaction to the pieces of the possible Brueghel.
I chose this one specially for you, Simon.
For Christmas?
Yeah, Christmas has come early for you.
Oh, wow. You bring them flat pack?
Hang on, there's another bit.
I should hope so. This looks very... Up we go.
Price of one.
Yes, Kevin was...
I thought it was about time we gave you a proper challenge, you see.
The way you say that always makes me worry, Bendor. Thank you. Did they really join up?
Simon was quickly able to settle that question.
Here we go. Look. Look closer. It's a dowel.
Okay.
And there's another one there. That's the sign of a professional panel maker. And one way of supporting the join would be to put dowels in to help strengthen the panel. This has been kept in a very damp place. And it's been wrapped with something when it was damp. And the damp has caused this horrible cloud. And why has it been overpainted up here? Why have these buildings been glazed out?
Yeah, there are huts in there, aren't there?
Yeah,
there's a whole town waiting
to emerge, yeah.
And if I point you to the expression on this little fellow here,
yeah,
there must be an artist that springs to mind for you.
Well, this is 17th century Dutch, and these little figures painted like this, Brueghel, or his father, one would hope.
Yan, yes, either Yan the First or Yan the Second.
Yeah.
I think this has probably got every single conservation challenge on it. It's got blanched varnish, oil varnish, overpaint, splits in the panel. You've really got your work cut out here.
It's the way you think that's very funny.
Yeah, no, I chose this one just because I wanted to see the look on your face.
Right, sleeves up. In we go.
A weak solution of wetting agent will gently remove the surface dirt and allow us to see into the painting more clearly.
Lovely.
Look at that. You immediately see into
all the shadows under the cow, aren't they lovely? Yes. Oh, it's so tantalising.
Wow, look at that.
On Art UK, the title of this picture is Autumn, and it looks like the villagers are picking apples to make cider.
He seems to relish the sort of the entertainment value of life in a village in the early 17th century. And there's almost something about these great landscape artists, including Gainsborough, is that it wasn't enough for them to master a depiction of landscape. They had to have fun putting in little figures doing something to give it, more meaning and purpose.
It's difficult to work out why this mysterious picture has areas of painting that differ so dramatically in quality, but there are hints of something promising beneath the murky overpaint. Our other picture, the possible Gainsborough, was less damaged, but just as mysterious.
I'm the least sure about this one of any of the pictures I brought you. So don't be too rude about it, because I'm quite nervous about this one. So what do we think?
Well, now it's without the glass. You can see into the picture much more clearly.
Right.
The first encouraging signs that it might be a sketch or a study, rather than a copy, are areas where we can see the artist has changed his mind during the painting of the picture.
You can see where there are movements of paint.
Oh yes,
you see?
There's little sort of scores
yeah,
into the paint.
It's almost as if there was another trunk
Well, if that is the ghost of an old tree trunk, that's a great thing, because it would suggest that it's not a copy.
Well, as we say in the trade, it's called it's pentiment, isn't it? Where the artist is working away on his picture as he's standing in front of it. It's not a copy, as you say, and he's changed his mind because it looked a bit peculiar there. So
we need to find more of those.
Well, I think you'll find there are. Yeah. Look at the bits and pieces around behind those figures. That's ideally where we might find something else.
Okay, we're still living. We're not dead yet. That's good.
No, very much not say. At least needs first aid, but not a major heart transplant.
You can understand Gainsborough's affection for the Suffolk countryside when you visit the town where he was born, Sudbury. He was the youngest son of 8 children of John Gainsborough, a wool merchant. During Thomas's childhood, they lived in this elegant house in the centre of the town. Although the wider Gainsborough family were prosperous, Thomas's father was the black sheep. A former bankrupt, he was not good with money. The young Thomas sounds like a bit of a scallywag who had some odd inclinations. He frequently bunked off school to go out into the countryside to draw the landscape. This love of nature and the urge to capture how it appeared was to stay with him for the rest of his life. There's a family story that Thomas's dad, suspecting his son was up to no good when he wasn't in school, actually followed him one day to see what he was up to. He found him sitting on a bank making a drawing. And when he saw the drawing, all his anger left him. And he said, "Tom will be a genius." The young prodigy was packed off to London at the age of 13 to be apprenticed to a painter. But Suffolk was his inspiration. This is one of his early pictures, painted when he was 19. The gentle countryside and dramatic cloudy skies of these first efforts show clearly the influence of Dutch landscape paintings, which he would have seen in London coffee houses and picture auctions. Cornard Wood is the setting of one of Gainsborough's most ambitious early landscapes. It's difficult for us today to understand quite how revolutionary it was for Gainsborough to want to paint a picture of rural Suffolk as it actually appeared, with grey skies and populated by the working poor. No one else was doing it, and few people would have wanted to buy the picture when it was finished. Cornard Wood is a short walk outside Sudbury, and it's extraordinary that nearly 300 years after he painted it, you can still find the spot where Gainsborough stood.
Goodness me, for a remote woodland scene, there's so much activity. There's a cow, 2 donkeys, 3 dogs, some flying ducks, and 5 people. And those 5 people are also very busy in turn. We've got the woman grazing her cow, another peasant gathering firewood. And this fellow I love down here, he's digging the wagon wash, which still exists in the view before us.
This beautifully observed depiction of the life of the countryside never left him. Cornard Wood, from the beginning of his career, shows exactly the same affection for the people it portrays as our smoking peasant from the very end of his life.
He wanted to depict their everyday activity, but I think he was particularly drawn to the life of the common folk, the commoners who had the right to use the common land, which they'd been doing for centuries. He was drawn to the romance of the rural idyll in a pre-industrial age. The problem is that that way of life was now under threat.
The threat was revolution, an agricultural revolution. Before the 18th century, the majority of Britain's population still lived in the countryside, growing subsistence crops in shared fields and grazing animals on the common. The move to more industrial food production meant bigger fields and enclosing the commons. The pastures and woodlands that had previously been available for all the people to use became the property of individual landowners. We can see this new rural landscape very clearly in a painting by Gainsborough himself, the portrait of Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. Mr. Andrews is a modern farmer, and his field has been planted in rows with a mechanical seed drill. In the distance, Sheep graze in a gated pasture where they can be selectively bred. But what about the commoners who used to have unfettered access to unenclosed land? In many cases, their very way of life had suddenly become illegal.
I'm just going to get my dog out.
Okay. Simon Whitehead has been catching rabbits using ferrets for 20 years. Ferreting was a popular way for commoners to supplement their diets in Georgian England.
Back then, a rabbit, that was a meal for a family. You know, maybe for a couple of days. You could catch half a dozen rabbits and probably get more money for them than you would do working for the land for a week.
They are quite sweet looking, but I see their ferocious fangs.
It's all in handling, as you get them used to being handled, they're as soft as anything.
After the commons were enclosed, ferreting became a form of poaching, and the penalties if you were caught were increasingly draconian.
Once you were turned into a poacher, then you've got the stress of trying to disguise what you're doing, because the penalties, obviously, for even having a means of harvesting food was, well, it doesn't bear to think about what they used to do to people that were caught taking rabbits. If people were poaching rabbits or trying to catch rabbits, they would have been deadly quiet. So nobody would have known what they were on about. So this is why we like to use nets, because it's quiet, it's not restrictive, and you can get in and get out without anybody knowing what you're doing.
In a few minutes, the ferrets have the desired effect. The rabbits make a dash for freedom and are caught in the net. These bunnies are bound for a local organic pie maker. To combat poaching, the notorious Black Act of 1723 introduced the death penalty for 50 new offences.
People were hung, people were publicly flogged. You know, they were sent on the ships out to Tasmania and Australia just for means of catching rabbits, never mind catching rabbits. Back then, it was proper brutal. So yeah, them acts changed a lot in our history.
Living in a clearing in a forest, I'm sure the smoking peasant in the Birmingham painting would have fallen foul of the game laws, but he looks like butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. I paid a visit to Simon's studio to see how he was progressing with the cleaning of the picture.
There we are. We're ready to fully understand the picture now. So what we're going to do here is take off not only the known varnish that we know is over all the picture, but also the most recent retouching. And you can see it. This just covers around the outside of the figures here, where it looks like there's a pentiment that has been painted out.
I'm encouraged to see so many pentiments, like this ghostly outline of the main tree trunk. This is just the sort of evidence we would expect to see in a sketch, where an artist is working out his composition.
Logically, it has all the ingredients for a preparatory work by Gainsborough.
Well, early days, we've still got to get the main gloop off this soupy area in the middle, which will give it more form. And with a little bit more time, I think we'll get there.
Come on, swab away.
Okay.
Swab, swab.
You are taskmaster.
Gainsborough's landscapes were a way to express his romantic attachment to the countryside, but they would never pay the rent. To earn a living, he was obliged to paint portraits, something he frequently claimed to detest. In fact, he was an exceptionally gifted portraitist with a lively style all of his own. And in 1759, he made a major gesture of intent. He moved to what was then the most fashionable town in Britain, Bath.
I've always admired Gainsborough's spirit of get up and go. He never did things by halves. And if he was going to paint people's portraits for a living, then he might as well come to where the punters were most susceptible, or as he himself put it, the continual hurry of one fool on the back of another.
Gainsborough was in his early 30s, and by now had a wife and 2 daughters to support. But his fluidity with the brush and an extraordinary ability to capture a likeness meant he could manage several fools a day. Success was rapid, and his prices escalated equally quickly. He moved into a house here, in the Circus. It was then, and remains, one of the smartest addresses in town. One of his neighbours was the Duke of Bedford. but he found earning the money to support this way of life extremely irksome. In the Holborn Museum, they have a fine example of a Bath period Gainsborough portrait.
This is George Byam, and he's a great example of the sort of fool that Gainsborough had to deal with on a regular basis. Byam's money came from a plantation in Antigua, and in 1762 he commissioned this magnificent portrait to celebrate his marriage to his wife, Louisa. A couple of years later, though, Byam was back knocking on Gainsborough's door, wondering if he wouldn't mind awfully adding in a portrait of their daughter, Selina. And while he was at it, could he please change the colour of Louisa's dress from pink to blue? Could he also please add some gold braid to his waistcoat hair? And finally, would he be able to change Louisa's hairstyle so that it represented the very latest hairstyle fashion in Bath? Now, Gainsborough might have found this all rather irritating, but I suspect he would have found some pleasure in painting this large piece of landscape here on the left. There's rather a nice cascading river and a sunlit cottage here in the background, and then shimmery, wind-beaten trees. This is probably all meant to represent the estates in Surrey that were owned by the Byams, but actually, if you crop the figures out, it's not that dissimilar to one of Gainsborough's earlier Suffolk landscapes. And it was just through this kind of imagined landscape that Gainsborough was able to find some release from what he called the cursed face business.
Despite Gainsborough's own love of a grand address, there seemed to be something about cottages that appealed to him. The peasant smoking at his cottage door was the last of a series of paintings Gainsborough made that show a family grouped around the door of their home. And it was while living in Bath that he conceived the idea for his first cottage door painting. It came about in an unusual way. On a trip to London, he was much taken by the eroticism of James Barrie's painting of Venus rising from the sea at the Royal Academy. In a letter to a friend, he confessed that on his way home that night, he encountered a live little Venus plying her trade, and Gainsborough succumbed to her charms. Back in Bath, he fell ill and decided he had caught something from the encounter with Venus. As a cure, he decided to take up horse riding, a decision that was to have a profound effect on his art.
Gainsborough's friend and fellow artist Ozias Humphrey wrote that the greater part of his landscapes owed their origins to his rides around the countryside outside Bath. Easy, Tommy. And I like to think that it was on one of those rides that Gainsborough first saw the scene of a family sat outside a cottage, and the image stuck with him.
Whether or not it was horse riding that effected a cure, I'm happy to report that Gainsborough made a complete recovery.
Gainsborough left Bath and moved to London in 1774, rich and successful. I doubt if he cared to remember any of the 325 faces he painted while he was here, but he did take away with him the image of the cottage door. There was more work to do there.
Though our picture has neither a cottage nor a door, it certainly belongs in the cottage door sequence. But is it by Gainsborough?
So, Bendel, come and have a look.
Simon has now completed the cleaning of the painting.
It looks like a proper picture now, but is it good enough to be what we were hoping it to be, do you think?
Don't know. I mean, I did think that this would be slightly less blobby, gloopy. It's definitely better. You've worked wonders with it.
It's much better. It's come out and it's become alive, I think.
Yeah, but is it good enough? I don't know. There are nice little islands of brilliance, but the whole thing is not singing for me. And for a late Gainsborough landscape, which he'd perfected landscape composition, hadn't he, by the time he'd painted the finished picture for this, it should be glowing, it should be singing, it should be full of poetry and emotion. I'm just not sure it is.
Despite Simon's sterling work to clean the painting, I felt it hadn't revealed any of the telltale evidence I was hoping to see that would point to a work by Thomas Gainsborough. It was time to get an expert eye to assess the picture, and I asked Gainsborough scholar Hugh Belsey to come and have a look.
Here we go. Well, Hugh, I was quite hopeful at the beginning, especially on paper. It's got, you know, the changes and things that might make you think it could be right. But I'm hoping you can guide me as to what we're really looking at.
Well, I don't think you're looking at a Gainsborough, I'm afraid.
Right.
Sorry.
No, I think I was there. I probably just hadn't actually admitted it to myself.
The handling is really very rudimentary and rather heavy in style. The figures don't have the poetry of Gainsborough. He can just turn his brush with very thin paint and create form, whereas this is plastered on, rather.
Right.
A technical term. And the clouds don't make any sense. The light behind that screen of trees is very clumsy. It just doesn't work.
OK, stop now. I'm feeling like I should have left it in the stalls.
Oh dear. But no, it's a good thing that you've done. If there's any chance that these things can be something good, then it's worthwhile. I think it could be by Thomas Barker of Bath, who was a great copyist of his and really based his whole career on knocking off Gainsboroughs in one form or another. Yes. And there are an awful lot of Barkers of Bath that have been called Gainsborough, so you mustn't feel bad about that.
So I'm not the first person.
No.
Thomas Barker of Bath was a self-taught gentleman painter and passionate admirer of Gainsborough, and he's just the sort of artist who would have made a copy like the Birmingham picture. But whoever painted it must have been able to study Gainsborough's original, because so many of the details are so faithfully reproduced. I think the only answer is that Barker saw it here, at Schomburgk House, where Gainsborough worked after moving to London in 1774.
It's an unlikely address for an artist who was passionate about painting landscapes, slap in the middle of the city and just down the road from the Royal Academy. But Gainsborough was still busy in what he called the cursed face business. He was even a favoured portraitist of the King, George III.
As well as being his studio, Schomburgk House served as a gallery, and Gainsborough kept a very open door.
So is this where Thomas Barker saw the original painting? Well, we don't know. But it is likely, as an aspiring landscape painter, that Thomas Barker would have visited Gainsborough's studio.
Gainsborough died in 1788. The walls of Schomburgk House stacked with his landscapes, unsold and unappreciated. After his death, landscape painting slowly gained acceptance in the public imagination, paving the way for Turner and Constable, both of whom acknowledged their debt to Gainsborough's pioneering vision.
The news that our painting is not a Gainsborough is disappointing, but for me there's still some unfinished business. I want to know what happened to our smoking peasant and his family. In the years after Gainsborough's death, Britain's landscape began to change rapidly, and the truly natural countryside he loved ceased to exist. But the attraction of the rural idyll grew more powerful as it disappeared. To give the industrial working class a stake in the new order, they were given small pockets of land, an echo of their previous way of life that still exists today, allotments.
So what have you got growing here now? It looks very bountiful.
There's garlic over there, a couple of rows of potatoes. I'm obsessed with rare kales, so there's a kind of kale project down this end.
Yum.
And turnips and salads in the polytunnel and globe artichokes.
It's incredible.
Yeah, there's a lot of food that you can get in this space. It's kind of measured in this very strange, archaic term called a pole. And so an allotment is 10 poles. And it was considered enough land for a family to feed itself on.
Okay.
And if you are productive and you work it hard, it really has the potential to feed exactly that, a family. I think it's good for my entire well-being, really. Like it's so beautiful here. This is in the middle of a city. I mean, it's like a little slice of the countryside.
Birmingham's first allotments date back to Gainsborough's time, but the movement thrived at the end of the 19th century, when the city's politicians vied to provide workers with their own little Eden.
the working kind of peasant in the countryside ends up in the city. Cities like Birmingham, big, massive, booming industrial cities. And the allotments come about because those workers basically have, quite rightly, a lot of unrest about not having land. So this is to appease them, essentially. And there were many, many people who now were wage labourers and didn't have enough money to buy food, and there needed to be provisions of land for them. So Birmingham has more allotments than any other city, and there are, I mean, this is a tiny site. There's sites with like 200, 300 allotments on it, you know, they're like small kind of allotment cities. And it was one of the first kind of cities to adopt having allotments. So there's one of the charms of the city is that there's these wonderful big allotment sites all over it, so you can have your little slice of the country.
It seems the enduring appeal of a little slice of the country is just as potent today as it was in Gainsborough's lifetime. There's a waiting list for a Birmingham allotment, and I'm almost tempted to add my name to it.
Having had a bit of a knock with the rejection of our first painting, I'm consoling myself with the prospect of seeing Simon's progress on our second, the potential Yan Brueghel. I can't help thinking the jolly cider-making peasants in Flanders look to have had a far more comfortable time of things than their English cousins in post-enclosure Britain.
Dying to get into the houses.
That's next. Okay. And there is your dovecote, Vendor. Look at that.
There's a dovecote or a ducat? What do you
What's
say?
a ducat?
Isn't that the posh way of saying dovecote? You say, I have a ducat.
Well, it's got 3 in a row. It's called it a triplet coat.
However it's pronounced, the crudely painted dovecote looked like a later addition. The upper panel has been so extensively overpainted, I was beginning to worry about this picture too.
Yes, I think we do need to move on to the better bits of the picture, because I've seen nothing in here so far that says Brueghel, or even comes close to Brueghel.
There we go. This is very nice. You're right. This, you know, this looks like a different picture, different.
Yeah,
panel.
it does. That's a lovely horse.
Look at the colours coming out in the horse's hooves.
Yeah. Now that looks like a bit of Brueghel. What a relief. Oh, that's amazing. Look at that. Oh, it's so good. Pink nose. Look at his bridle. Isn't that lovely? Well, the ultimate test for Brueghel is the back end of a cow. So,
not always. Yeah.
Simon, choose your cow.
Well, we've got a good array of cows here. Look at that. Look at these tiny little strokes in here, which are hatching lines, which makes the 3-dimension of the animal.
Oh, we're so lucky they're all intact.
They're in beautiful condition.
Try that blob.
This little white blob is very strange, and it looks like some water has been sitting on the surface and has caused that bloom that I talked about. And hopefully it'll just come away as the varnish dissolves. Yeah, and there she goes, look. Thank goodness it's not in the paint.
That is actually like magic. Poof, it's gone.
I aim to please.
Well, this is very encouraging because I was getting a bit despondent by the quality of the top, and everything in the bottom half of the panel is actually exceeding my expectations of the quality of the painting.
I'd agree. The details of the lighter areas that have survived are in great condition.
Any doubts I have about this picture are easily calmed by looking at the back end of a cow. However, we do need all the ammunition we can get if we're going to get our attribution through. So we've asked dendrochronologist Professor Peter Klein to help us with some science. Peter uses the growth rings in the wood to date the panel, and should have an answer for us soon. Yan Brueghel was one of the finest painters from a prestigious family of artists who bore the Brueghel name. The dynasty was established by his father, the pioneering landscape painter Peter Brueghel, whose Hunters in the Snow was painted in the winter of 1565. His son Yan had a busy studio in Antwerp. He's shown here in a tender family group, painted by his friend and collaborator, Peter Paul Rubens. To find out what to look for in a painting from Yan Brueghel in his workshop, I went to Sotheby's to meet Andrew Fletcher, head of their Old Masters department, and to see a bona fide work by Yan Brueghel the Elder.
What he does is he takes the heroic landscape that was invented by his father, and he adds into it a myriad of figures, painted in this wonderfully detailed, feathery way.
They're extraordinarily detailed,
They're
aren't they?
absolutely
they're
extraordinary.
like a miniature.
It's almost as if he's using some sort of artificial magnification to achieve this level of detail. He sadly dies of cholera in 1625. However, the dynasty does not stop there, because he had had a son who we call Yan Brueghel the Younger, and actually so close is Yan Brueghel the Younger's work to that of his father. It's very problematic determining whether a painting is by Yan Brueghel the Younger or Yan Brueghel the Elder.
This early Yan the Elder work is actually a biblical subject, though you have to look closely to work out whose story is being told.
Here we see on the far right a chap being cast overboard from this ship in full sail. And if we look slightly further to the left, we see a rather large fish, which we must describe as a whale, even if he doesn't particularly look like one,
it's quite frog-like,
about to gobble him up. And that, of course, is the Old Testament subject of Jonah. So you can see here, this it's almost painted with the very tip of his brush. A wonderful, must have had the most steady hand imaginable. Extraordinary sense of confidence in what he was doing. Understanding of anatomy. If you look at some of the figures, like this one, this chap bending over like that, with one shoulder slightly raised, the other one down, is totally believable.
Yes, he is, isn't he?
And, you know, I think in imitations, you only have to look at the anatomy of the figures to realise in many cases that that can't be by the great man himself.
The figures in the Birmingham painting certainly have this anatomical realism. You can really feel the weight of this bag of apples being heaved into the back of the cart. It would be a real coup if our figures are by Yan the Elder, as his pictures are more sought after than his son's. But any attribution, whether it be elder, younger or workshop, will be a significant leg up for this sadly mistreated picture. Back at Simon's studio, overpaint is coming off. If Yan Brueghel used some form of magnification to paint his pictures, it's somehow fitting that Simon needs a microscope for the painstaking process of restoration. The picture revealed is remarkable.
I'm almost having trouble believing this is the same painting that I brought you some weeks ago.
What?
Half of it seems to have disappeared. We've got a whole new town here.
Yes.
All these trees have emerged.
Yeah. Well, that's called overpaint.
It's just amazing. So there's a massive rock in the way.
That's where the dovecot was. Yeah.
There's a whole other town scene with the church here.
Yeah. The quality of what we're uncovering is absolutely wonderful, and the small details.
We've got a whole new crowd scene here.
Yeah.
And so someone up here is shaking down the apples for them to pick up.
Yeah, they're all on their hands and knees picking them up down here. And then there's the cart down here with the horse. All the apples being tumbled into the back of the cart. Presumably being taken off into the village here. There is actually a cider press.
And everything now makes much more sense as a narrative in this picture. The cider making process.
Yes.
Is
there's a cycle going
complete,
on,
isn't it?
Yeah.
The trees, I don't think, are Yan Brueghel the Elder trees.
They're two different hands.
There's definitely two different hands, this picture.
What's becoming clear as the scene is uncovered is that the picture is a collaboration by two different artists, one for the figures and another for the landscape.
So the question is, who are the trees by? And there's a number of artists that Yan Brueghel the Elder was collaborating with.
Yes.
First in my mind for these particular trees is an artist called Ustemompa.
Ustemompa.
Yeah. It's a mouthful. I mean, there's more work to do here, but he does this technique of sort of, it looks rather mechanical to get the leaves like that, and I imagine it was applied rather quickly.
And very repetitively as well.
Yeah, like a sponge almost.
Yeah.
The other good news is that the figures are in absolutely fantastic condition.
Really nice condition.
They are fizzing with colour and details.
Yeah.
I think these are so good.
Yes.
Well done. It looks absolutely fantastic.
It is
I
amazing.
can't wait to see the rest.
Yeah, mate, it's going to take another 6 years to do that.
Collaborations were very common in Antwerp at this time, and Juste Momper was in high demand, supplying backgrounds to other painters, including both Yan Brueghel the Elder and the Younger. I wanted to see if I could find an example of a similar artistic collaboration to make a comparison, and I found one at Kedleston Hall in Derbyshire. With a landscape by Juste Momper and figures by Yan Brueghel the Elder, I think this is the best example in the country.
It's a fascinating contest of talent. You can almost feel the two painters fizzing off each other, trying to outdo each other with their quality. The subject is St. Peter, a passage in the New Testament when he comes past the town and is greeted by a penitent Roman centurion. What's immediately noticeable to my eye is the technique in the trees here. It's exactly like the trees in our painting, particularly the way the foliage is applied in rather staccato, regular brushstrokes. This is such a fantastic example of a Juste Momper landscape, and I love the way your eye just recedes into the distance. He's using the artist's trick of atmospheric perspective.
Atmospheric perspective is a way to create a sense of distance in a painting, with paler and less contrasty colours towards the horizon. Leonardo da Vinci, who wrote a treatise on this technique, used it in the Mona Lisa.
Flemish artists like Juste Momper would do it in a very simple way, with a brown foreground, a green middle ground, and those alluring blues in the background there. Makes you want to strap on your hiking boots and go for a stroll up the valley. And what about the figures? Well, the problem here is the scale of the figures are much larger than the ones we see in our paintings, so making a direct comparison is quite difficult. But if we look at the top left-hand corner here, there are a series of smaller figures approaching this gateway. Well, call me an optimist, but they really, really remind me of the figures in our painting, particularly the cool pastel colours and the way the faces are just breathed into life with a couple of dabs for the eyes. I'm so pleased to have found this picture. I really think it helps us with the attribution of our painting. For me, the foliage and the landscape, well, it's a bit of a slam dunk. I'm absolutely sure our landscape is by Juste Momper. The figures, well, I'm really tempted to believe our painting was by Yan Brueghel the Elder. But unfortunately, it's not up to me.
It's taken Simon many weeks to clean our painting, and I couldn't be more excited to see the final result.
Oh, my God. Without doubt, this is the most extraordinary transformation I've ever worked on with you.
Yeah.
And now it's a picture. My God, what a picture it is. It's extraordinary.
It's a really powerful object, isn't it? Yeah.
The background here is, hang on, we've got mountains.
Yes.
And...
in the distance?
A river.
Exactly.
A river.
And what's on the river?
A river with boats.
There's little sailboats, yeah.
And the join, what a triumph there. I can hardly see it. There's just one thing. For this to be a background by Juste Momper, I would expect it to be that sort of vibrant Flemish blue.
Absolutely right. The pigment he has used here in the sky is smalt, and smalt is famous for discolouring and degrading.
Okay.
And this is a prime example of that, where the distance in the landscape has slightly dissipated now because they would have had hints of smalt in it to give distance into the landscape.
And we can see tiny smidgens of unfaded smalt in here, is that right?
Yep.
And had that glass smalt not faded, then I think we would get an enhanced feeling of, you know the phrase, atmospheric perspective?
That's right, yes, indeed.
So if we think that this is by two artists, Juste Momper being a bit cheap with his blue in the background, Yan Brueghel comes along, Rolls-Royce, nothing spared, brilliant pigments, beautifully painted.
And beautifully preserved.
Yeah. I think if we get this through as a Brueghel, for me, this picture is now going to be known as the miracle of the Brueghel. Because I would never have thought, when I was looking at the two planks in the storeroom at Birmingham, that we would get anything like this.
Yeah. Whoever had the audacity to think that they could do a better job than what we've uncovered is outrageous.
Yes. Crimes against art.
Whoever the criminal was, it's good to have felt his collar so effectively. The work that Simon has put in has revealed a dramatically different painting. The Flemish village has emerged from the gloom as if the sun had come out from behind a cloud. The crudely painted buildings and trees covering the landscape have gone, revealing a river gently meandering into the misty distance. And the patient horse, with his pink nose, is still waiting to be led away. A final boost to our confidence is the arrival of Peter Klein's dendrochronology results.
Creation of the painting possible from 1595. So essentially that means it's not a later fake, it's early enough to come from the workshop of Yan Brueghel the Elder, but if the panel hung around in the workshop for a bit longer, it could have been painted by Yan Brueghel the Younger.
Absolutely right.
All our options are open.
I think this leaves little doubt the picture is from Yan Brueghel's studio in Antwerp. But are the figures good enough to be by Yan Brueghel himself, his son Yan the Younger, or simply from his workshop?
It's time to show our cleaned and restored picture to Brueghel expert Andrew Fletcher.
I had sent Andrew a photograph of the panel as it was when I first found it in the stores of Birmingham Art Gallery.
Thanks for coming to see us.
Pleasure.
Andrew,
Gosh.
can I present our painting?
Yes, you may. Gosh, what a transformation. What an amazing change.
Andrew, the more we've revealed about the painting, the more it seems to me that we're dealing with a picture by not one but two artists. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. That's very clear and very common from the early 17th century in Antwerp. I would say that everything except the staffage, by which I mean the figures, is by one artist who is Eustace Momper. The figures completely make this painting what it is, and without them it would be less than half of what we see today.
Yes. Andrew, you've looked at vast numbers of these and you have a great filter in your mind to work out the quality of the figures. How do these rank in terms of Yan Brueghel the Elder, the Younger, workshop follower of?
Well, they're pretty good. I would think they are almost certainly painted in the workshop of Yan Brueghel the Elder. And I have to say, the more I look at them and the way they paint is applied, the more I think there's a decent chance that they could be by Yan Brueghel the Younger.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's great, isn't it?
While I must confess to being a little disappointed that the figures are not by Yan Brueghel the Elder, this is still an excellent result. Confirmation that they are good enough to be from his workshop and may even be by Yan the Younger means they come from a period when the two Brueghels were working together and producing some of their finest pictures, and this is really positive news for Birmingham.
It's so lovely to have brought a painting like this by two of Flanders' leading painters back to light 400 years later, where before it was essentially gone.
Well, it's come a long way from two planks in a drawer in Birmingham. And well done, Simon. Ciders all round. No?
Pint of cider, yeah. Get rid of the planks.
We've got a mixed bag of verdicts to report when we return the two paintings to Birmingham Art Gallery. A small gathering of staff and friends of the museum stayed behind after closing to hear what we had discovered. I think Bendor will be pleased he didn't bet his shirt on the first painting being a Gainsborough.
We showed the picture to Hugh Belsey, who is the world's leading expert in all things Gainsborough, and his view about the picture was that it's not by Gainsborough. Not only did he say it's not by Gainsborough, he said, not on your Nelly. What were you thinking? Now, normally in these circumstances, we have to leave you with an attribution which is just unknown artist copying someone like Gainsborough. But we can in fact tell you that in Hugh Belsey's opinion, this picture is in fact by an artist called Thomas Barker of Bath, who is known as a competent early 19th century British landscape artist, but he was obsessed with Gainsborough. And he did lots of copies, and we now know that he did lots of sort of free interpretations of Gainsborough. And that is what this is. So it wasn't quite the masterpiece we were looking for. However, I do have some slightly more encouraging news for you with our second painting. So, I have to say, in Britain's Lost Masterpieces, we've had some fairly exciting transformations of pictures in the past, but we've never had anything quite as exciting as this. We have shown the picture to the head of the Sotheby's Old Master Department, Andrew Fletcher, who has seen more of these pictures than you and I have had hot dinners. And he believes that the background is painted by someone called Eustace de Montper. He was one of the leading landscape artists in Flanders and Holland in the early 17th century. And in his opinion, the figures are from Yan Brueghel the Elder's studio, and we think we can be reasonably certain who painted them within the studio, and that was Yan Brueghel the Younger. And it probably would have been part of a set of 4. So somewhere out there are spring, winter, and summer. So keep your eyes peeled.
Victoria, are you pleased with what we've uncovered?
Obviously the Flemish picture it's been astonishing to see that emerge from under all of that dirt and old varnish and underpainting. It's really kind of delightful and intriguing, and I think it's a picture that when we get it out on display in the galleries, our visitors are going to love as well. So it's something that will really enrich our collection here.
Britain's major galleries house some of the finest collections of art to be found anywhere in the world.
But there are thousands of other artworks we know little about in the collections of smaller institutions. Over 80% of this publicly owned treasure is in storage and often uncatalogued. We don't know the name of the artist, the subject, or when and where they were painted.
The Art UK website was created to shine a light into these shadows, and now has over 200,000 paintings online. Using this database, we'll be travelling the country, seeking out potential lost masterpieces.
When we find an interesting painting, I'll investigate the story behind its creation, using a meticulous process of restoration, research, and scientific analysis.
I'll be exploring the world in which these works were created, the social and historical background to the life of the artists, which gives a painting its context.
But simply finding a painting is just the beginning of the trail.
This week we've come to Cardiff, the capital city of Wales. We're on the trail of a painting that may be a treasure from the early years of the Italian Renaissance.
There's been a mystery surrounding the picture for over 100 years, but it has a fascinating history involving murder in Medici Florence and secret deals at the shady end of the art market.
And I'll be looking at the extraordinary story of the fabulously wealthy art collecting sisters who bought the picture and eventually donated it to Cardiff Art Gallery.
They had this extraordinary vision for Wales.
Is our picture a lost masterpiece? Or has it been subject to some very underhand interference?
This is a faked surface.
Oh, don't say that.
What will the verdict be? Our journey begins in the National Museum of Wales, home to Cardiff's Art Gallery.
Today, we're being shown round by Senior Curator Anne Pritchard.
Hi, lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you.
After a trip through some impressive galleries, things are a bit more down to earth when we get to the picture store.
Here we go.
The painting I've come to see is officially described as being by a follower of Sandro Botticelli. In other words, a later copy by another artist. It's a Madonna with a Christ child holding a pomegranate.
I was quite impressed with the image of this picture on Art UK, but in the flesh, my goodness me, parts of it really sing. I think it's absolutely beautiful.
Sandro Botticelli belongs in painting's Premier League. He was working in Florence in the early years of the Italian Renaissance, and his Birth of Venus is now one of the most familiar images in Western art. There are parts of this picture that are so good, I wonder whether it could actually be by Botticelli himself, or at the very least, made in his workshop.
There's lots of mystery going on here, though, because parts of it are really absolutely not up to Botticelli's standard at all. The hands, for example, are very simplistic and stiff, and they look as if they've been sort of traced on by my daughter, who is 4. And yet the quality of the head, goodness me, that's beautiful. And Christ's expression is very good too. And I always find when you've got a picture like this which has manifestly really good bits, at the same time as having really questionably bad bits, well, that often means there's a mystery waiting to be solved. There are lots of questions, though, we need to answer. What's it painted on? To what extent has it been interfered with later on? And am I just being blindly optimistic? How intriguing.
To start answering some of these questions, we moved the painting to the museum conservation studio, where we were joined by Adam Webster, the gallery's chief conservator.
How nice to see it under proper lights.
Adam pointed out some encouraging signs of pentimenti, alterations to the picture that had been made by the original artist.
There are some pentimenti, for example, around his leg here, and this quite intriguing area around the neck here.
I just think she's such a lovely image. Beautiful, don't you think?
I hope that isn't clouding your judgment, Bendor. Are you familiar with the phenomenon of scopophilia?
Oh, God. Oh, it sounds awful. What is it?
It's just the idea that the male gaze is, I guess, clouded by whether it or not it perceives something as beautiful. And if it perceives beauty, then it might afford the object higher value than it's really worth.
I think, actually, it sounds like I'm absolutely guilty, because my reaction to this picture, isn't that interesting, from a sort of connoisseurial point of view, is that I think because she's beautiful, it must be a good painting.
See,
so that's it, scopophilia, isn't it?
Yep.
Oh, that's one
You've
of
got all the symptoms.
Oh no, it sounds like I'm going to get a rash next, by the way you're diagnosing
I hope you're not contagious.
In fact, this painting was owned by a woman, Gwendolyn Davis, and was bequeathed to the Cardiff Museum in 1952. It was part of one of the most important collections of paintings ever given to a UK gallery.
You don't have to spend long browsing these galleries before you realise that this really is a world-class collection of international art, and that the name Gwendolyn Davis comes up frequently as a donor. Her sister Margaret, it seems, was just as generous.
As well as our Botticelli, the Davis sisters gifted over 260 works of art to the National Museum. English landscapes by Gainsborough and Constable, a Mannerist masterpiece from El Greco's studio, and a full roll call of Impressionists, Renoir's La Parisienne and landscapes by Cézanne and Monet.
So who were Gwendolyn and Margaret Davis, these incredibly generous sisters, and where did their money come from?
To answer that question, I've come a few miles along the coast, west of Cardiff, to Barry Docks. It's difficult to believe that this tranquil coastal town was once the busiest coal port in the world. It was opened in 1889 as an alternative to the expensive and congested harbour at Cardiff. Unlike Cardiff, it was not dependent on the tide for access and had its own direct rail link to the South Wales coalfields. By the early 20th century, nearly 20,000 people worked on these wharfs.
And here's the man who built it all, David Davis. Gwendolyn and Margaret were his grandchildren, and with the formidable Davis fortune behind them, they set about creating an art collection to rival any in Britain.
The family were Calvinist Methodists, a uniquely Welsh nonconformist faith, strictly teetotal and forbidden to do anything on the Sabbath. But on their 25th birthdays, the sisters each inherited more than £50 million in today's money. They began to spread their wings, and art became central to their lives. Traveling across Europe, they visited the great collections and attended art history lectures. But in 1914, the outbreak of the First World War brought a halt to their artistic adventures. Their philanthropic nature saw the sisters travel to France, volunteering in a canteen behind the lines. They remained abroad throughout the hostilities, and their impressionist shopping spree came to a halt.
This was not the end of their artistic journey. While in France, the sisters conceived of a plan to initiate a cultural renaissance at home and to give something back to Wales. Their greatest achievements were yet to come.
Our possible Botticelli has arrived at the London studio of paintings restoration specialist Simon Gillespie.
Voila!
The first task is to remove it from its frame.
What's this label?
All these labels here say Botticelli because when they bought it, there was no doubt it was the real deal. In fact, it was their most important painting.
Really?
And now it's just thought to be a copy.
Ever the optimist, I think the simple wooden panel is already looking promising.
Oh yes, I mean, I'm hearing choirs of angels and everything.
Let's have a closer look. So, here we are.
Simon's eagle eye immediately spots some very odd retouching.
These cracks are actually painted on.
Are they?
Yeah. They're actually scratched into the surface. You see, you look closer.
Oh, fake cracks.
And they've got dirt in them. Even without lenses on, I can see that. This is a faked surface.
Oh, it does say that. Hang on. Well, it's a fake or this bit's a fake?
Certainly that's fake.
Oh dear.
Is the whole thing fake?
Simon, you start talking about fakes.
Is the whole thing a fake?
Don't say that. Reassure me. Your job is to reassure me.
Okay, so here we've got a nice area of original crack. This is the sort of cracks that you'd expect in a panel of this age.
Right, well, good. That's better.
It needs some scientific backup as to what we are looking at. X-ray will actually show us what damage there is underneath all this overpaint.
Right.
It may even show pentiments of where the artist has changed his mind. Infrared will also be very useful to determine the artist's technique, because we'll be able to see the drawing lines that have been built up.
All right, so we need to chuck the kitchen sink at this one.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I mean, there are great parts to it. He knew how to capture beauty.
Simon's list of technical investigations will help unlock the secrets of our painting. And at Art Analysis and Research, the panel is X-rayed and given an infrared scan. In Renaissance Florence, a picture like this would usually have been painted on poplar wood, which unfortunately can't be dated. But we need to confirm as far as possible that the materials match what we know of Botticelli's workshop practice. Dendrochronologist Peter Klein takes a tiny sample of the wood panel for analysis. While we wait for the results of these tests, Adam Webster, the Cardiff Gallery's chief conservator, has come to London to discuss the planned treatment of the painting.
So you've opened up some areas.
Yes. The test that I've carried out here is removing the dirt, yellow varnish, and some of the overpaint.
So this is suspiciously smooth here in your raking light, and then suddenly, we're back to the 15th century.
Yeah.
Adam, the next question for you is, given this background, which we're very sure is what, late 19th century?
I would say it's late 19th century, yeah.
What do we do with it? Is it part of the picture's history, or is it a terrible abomination that should be whipped off?
In a way, although we feel that aesthetically this is not as desirable as the original, it also has its own history. And I think that what we need to do is create a sort of picture of what this surface is showing us and make a really balanced judgment about what needs to stay and what doesn't stay.
So it seems likely our picture has suffered extensive damage at some point, and someone has tried to rescue the most significant areas, the faces of the Madonna and Child. They certainly look to be very fine indeed, perhaps worthy of Botticelli himself, but much of the rest of the picture has been poorly patched up. But I still have a good feeling about the painting.
Just opening these small areas up, they look a lot better than I was expecting them to.
I was expecting worse.
Yeah.
I was expecting it to be worse than this, yeah.
Oh, I've had him on the phone for hours. Why have you brought me this picture? It's awful.
It may be my scopophilia, but I think the sign of a truly great painter is that ability to capture beauty. And Botticelli could do that supremely well. Sandro Botticelli was born in Florence around 1445, in the early years of the Italian Renaissance, just as the finishing touches were being made to the great dome of the cathedral. But this was also one of the most turbulent periods in the city's history, a time of political intrigue and murderous infighting between the leading Florentine families. Despite this turmoil, Botticelli managed to produce some serenely beautiful work that put the human figure at the center of his art. And the first thing I wanted to do was have a look at his most famous painting, the biggest tourist magnet in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, The Birth of Venus.
Except it doesn't show The Birth of Venus. That title was given to the picture long after Botticelli painted it. What we actually see is the arrival of Venus. She's emerged from the sea, fully formed, and she's been blown towards the land by the wind god, Zephyr. And the title is not the only thing that's wrong about the painting. But look at those waves. Well, they're most curious, aren't they? You might almost be forgiven for thinking that Botticelli had never seen the sea before. What about the landscape? Well, the perspective, that cornerstone of Renaissance art, is frankly all wrong. But in a way, it's everything that's wrong about the picture which helps make it so right. Botticelli would say, perspective schmective. Let's just focus on the important thing about the picture.
This is the first full-length nude in Western painting. But we're so familiar with the image, it's easy to forget this remarkable fact.
And what a beauty she is, as she's so real and alive. You could imagine her on a catwalk today, or on a Hollywood film poster.
Her pose is copied from Greek and Roman statues, and the scene depicted is from the texts of Greek mythology. The rediscovery of this ancient classical culture was firing the imaginations of a new generation of Florence's artists who had previously been restricted to Christian themes.
Now, in academic art history, we're supposed to look at pictures like this and go, what does it mean? Well, I don't think it means anything, really. I think the subject is just an excuse, a fig leaf, to allow Botticelli to paint a full-length nude like this. And the secret of Botticelli's success is that he was able to translate this beauty into his other subjects too.
Transferring this same arresting beauty to a religious subject was just as revolutionary. Botticelli could give an erotic charge to a pagan image like Venus, but he didn't have the same license with the Virgin Mary. This is the Madonna of the Pomegranate, and she's every bit as beautiful as the Venus. The pomegranate, which we also have in the Cardiff picture, is a symbol of Christ's suffering, and Mary's mournful gaze shows she knows of the sorrows to come. But if anything, her sadness makes her beauty more powerful.
Recognize her? There's been a great deal of debate over exactly who Botticelli used as his model for the Venus, but I think there's little doubt that he used the same model to at least inspire his Madonnas.
So, how does this help us with the attribution of the Cardiff Madonna?
We can see here what we need to be looking for in a genuine Botticelli. He has a very idiosyncratic way of drawing his features. For example, first he does an underdrawing on the panel, then he paints the flesh tones, and then he redraws the outline on top, which gives you this very hard edge. And often he will then work the line a number of times so that you can see a change in, say, the angle of a leg or a foot.
We can see that here in the line of Christ's leg and the Virgin's cheek, and we've seen exactly the same kind of redrawn outlines in our Cardiff Madonna. For someone who was born around 1445, we know a surprising amount about Alessandro di Mariano, to give Botticelli his full name.
This is the Ognissanti district of Florence. In the mid-1400s, it would have been at the edge of the city, just inside the medieval walls. It's where Botticelli grew up and spent most of his life.
Centred around the cloisters and kitchen gardens of the Franciscan monastery, Ognissanti was a district of small businesses and workshops.
He's supposed to have been born in number 28. Ah, here it is. His rather stocky older brother was known as Botticello, which means the barrel. So when young Alessandro came along, he became known as the little barrel, Botticelli. And blessed are they who endure life with a silly name.
The family were not wealthy. His father was a tanner, but Little Barrel had talent. And talented people very soon came to the attention of the de facto rulers of the city, brothers Lorenzo and Giuliano Medici. Botticelli's first big commission was an altarpiece for this church, Santa Maria Novella, and it tells us a great deal about the kind of circles the young painter was moving in. Today, the painting hangs in the Uffizi.
First thing to point out is Little Barrel himself. This is thought to be a self-portrait on the right-hand side of the picture, but it's not the only likeness we see here.
The crowd is peppered with portraits of notable Medici family members, past and present, including the current generation, Giuliano and his brother Lorenzo.
This one picture is a snapshot of Botticelli's world. It's a tribute to the power of the Medici and a reminder that Botticelli was right in the midst of things.
Shortly after this painting was finished, the young Sandro Botticelli was caught up in a notorious chapter in Florentine history. A bloody coup, known as the Pazzi conspiracy, attempted to topple the ruling Medici clan.
In 1478, some of their rivals for control of the city, members of the Pazzi banking family, in cahoots with the Pope, Sixtus IV, tried to put an end to Medici rule and indeed to the Medici themselves.
During Sunday Mass in the cathedral, the brothers were set upon. Giuliano was stabbed to death, but Lorenzo, though wounded, managed to escape. Medici supporters quickly rallied round Lorenzo, and it became clear that the plot had failed.
The rest of the day was an orgy of violence, as members of the Pazzi faction were defenestrated from the windows up here, or lynched in the piazza down here. The general uprising against Medici rule that the Pazzi had expected failed to materialize, because it seems that the ordinary citizens of Florence, the popolani, were quite content with Medici rule. They certainly weren't in the mood to be pushed around by a bunch of bankers.
Pope Sixtus, who had been one of the instigators of the plot, was furious, and for 3 years he tried everything he could think of to defeat Lorenzo. But in the end, a truce was negotiated.
And this is where Botticelli comes back into the story to help save the day. As a peace offering, the Medici arranged for 3 of the greatest artists from Florence, by then recognized as the pinnacle of artistic excellence in Italy, to go to Rome and work for the Pope. And one of them was Sandro Botticelli.
In July 1481, accompanied by 2 other artists and their retinue, Botticelli left his home city for the journey to Rome.
In 1918, Gwendolyn and Margaret Davis were also making a journey, returning home to Wales at the end of the First World War. In the battlefields of France, they had discussed how they could use their fortune to benefit the community they had grown up in. And in 1920, they bought this house, Gregginog Hall in Powys, central Wales.
They had a grand plan for the house, to establish an arts and cultural centre for Wales, where they could display their ever-expanding art collection. But ultimately, Gregginog became their home. Good morning.
Hello, Emma. How lovely to meet you.
Art historian Anne Sumner has studied the Davis sisters and knows Gregginog well. The sisters' art collection has now gone to the Cardiff Museum and elsewhere. But there is one very significant picture still in the house. a small watercolour called The Algerian by Hercules Brabazon.
So this is where it all began. This is the very first work of art that the sisters bought. This was purchased by Margaret in 1906. And it's quite extraordinary, really, that they move on to make such major acquisitions so quickly. 1908, they buy their first major Turners, spending over £13,000 on 2 of them. And by 1912, thinking about major Impressionist purchases.
Monet became a favourite. They bought several of his views of Venice, a city they loved. Their confidence was bolstered by their ability to visit the world's greatest art collections. They were extremely well travelled and recorded everything in beautifully illustrated journals.
Now this one is from 1909, and there's a page here I thought you'd be particularly interested in. Botticelli here. So this is actually describing an evening drive out of Florence and up to Fiesole, one of her favourite places. And she actually has stuck in here one of the olive branches from the trees.
Having just seen Botticelli's painting of spring, the Primavera, in the Uffizi, Gwendolen imagines the painter's first glimpse of his muse.
Was it not on this same hill that Botticelli saw her, coming through the orange groves that hung around Lorenzo's villa, and climbing up some toilsome steep, our souls, together with the soul of silent things, went out to meet the spring.
So certainly not understated.
Certainly not.
When they eventually settled at Gregnog Hall, their most successful cultural enterprise was a festival of music and poetry, which involved a major revamp of the billiard room.
One of the key things for them was to have music here, and they created this wonderful space which became so famous for the Gregnog Festival. You have people like Gustav Holst here, Adrian Bolt, and the Impressionist paintings that the Davies sisters collected were actually hanging on the walls here. So it must have been a very, very special experience for people who came.
As well as superstars from the world of contemporary classical music, the festival photo album shows a diverse range of supporters. The Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin, George Bernard Shaw, and even comedian Joyce Grenfell.
They really enjoyed themselves. You know, you think about them travelling when they were young, playing tennis in Monte Carlo, visiting art galleries. We think about them living in rural Montgomeryshire, which of course they did, but they had a flat in London. And I think they were extraordinary, real visionaries who were actually probably very exciting people to meet in a way. In their quiet manner, they had this extraordinary vision for Wales.
In the late summer of 1481, Sandro Botticelli and his companions arrived in Rome. The delighted Pope Sixtus set them to work at St. Peter's, decorating the walls of his newly built ceremonial chapel, the Capella Magna. Named after Pope Sixtus, it's better known to us today as the Sistine Chapel, and is now one of the most popular tourist destinations on Earth. 25 years after the Florentine masters frescoed the walls, Michelangelo was commissioned to fresco the ceiling. And ever since, everyone who visits the chapel looks straight up at the roof and leaves with a stiff neck. But by overlooking Botticelli's frescoes, they're missing a treat.
I think this was a pivotal moment in Botticelli's career. He'd never really travelled far from Florence before, and now he found himself packed off to Rome, the centre of the civilised world, working for the most powerful man in Christendom.
Rome changed Botticelli. In the city, he saw for the first time the remains of the classical past and began to incorporate them in his paintings. But it was also an endorsement of his status. he brought his own mastery of colour and line to the frescoes, and they are significantly more successful than those of his companions. For me, Botticelli's Sistine Chapel frescoes are one of the great tragedies of art history, because I think they're his best pictures. But of course, everybody goes in and looks straight up at Michelangelo's ceiling. But if you spend time looking at some of the details of Botticelli's frescoes, you get to see just what a unique artist he really was. This is the Temptation of Moses. Sixtus demanded his artists use the rather old-fashioned device of showing lots of different episodes from the same story in one painting. But what saves it is Botticelli's vivid storytelling. Look at this fellow down here on the bottom right. He's one of the Hebrews who's been attacked by an Egyptian, who Moses later kills, but the expression on his face is so vivid and realistic. You really get a sense that he was unjustly attacked, and you can see him smarting from the wound on his head. It's fantastically painted. My favourite of the three frescoes is this one, The Temptations of Christ. Here's the devil tempting a fasting Jesus to turn the stones into bread and feed himself. I love the traditional medieval portrayal of Satan in a monk's cowl with talons for feet. After Jesus rejects the final temptation, Satan is cast down from the mountain heights. And I can't help wondering if Botticelli was inspired by memories of the Pazzi conspirators being thrown out of the windows in Florence. To make viewers think that the picture is actually a real and eternal story, Botticelli introduces a supporting range of characters of contemporary figures, faces of recognizably real people. Some are young and some are old, some are beautiful and some are not. I also like the fact that they are full of prototypes for our picture back in Cardiff. Lots of classic Botticelli beauties with their slightly tilted heads. Of course, he had great technical skill, but he also had a rare ability to breathe a special sense of life into his subjects, and he uses that to connect with his audiences on an emotional level as well as a visual one. It's the emotional power of Botticelli's faces and gazes that allow us to feel and dream our way into another world.
Our painting was bequeathed to the National Museum of Wales by Gwendolyn Davies in 1952, along with many other important works of art. But the significance of this gift stretched far beyond the boost it gave to the gallery's collection. It was to play an important part in Cardiff's battle to become capital of Wales, because surprisingly, until 1955, Wales had no capital.
The reason why Wales didn't have a capital is because constitutionally Wales didn't exist. After the Acts of Union in the 16th century, Wales is part of England, administrative, legally, educationally, etc. But during the 19th century, and particularly the end of the 19th century, there is this process and development, which is often called the national revival, where Wales starts to have a much stronger sense of its distinctiveness and separateness and difference from England, and also to start developing its own, like a proto-state, if you like, its own national trappings. It has a national museum, a national library, etc.
As part of Cardiff's development as a capital city in waiting, the area known as Cathays Park on the northern edge of the city centre was chosen to be the site of an ambitious complex of civic buildings. A new town hall, law courts, and a temple of health were to be built in a unified style with broad avenues and green open spaces. The National Museum was an important part of the plan.
All the buildings in the Civic Centre, as it was originally envisaged, were to be of the same stone, of Portland stone, to give that sense of unity to it, and indeed many people have recalled it as sort of like a white city. What you can see here is what many would agree is one of the finest civic centres in Britain, if not in the world. And that's part of Cardiff's push to be recognised as, to use the words of the time, the metropolis of Wales.
The ambitious plan to create a civic complex worthy of a capital city finally paid off in 1955, when Cardiff beat off competition from Carnarvon and Aberystwyth to become capital of Wales. And And it's great to think our painting played a tiny part in that result.
Back in London, I visited Simon's studio on a day of high excitement. It's Results Day. Peter Klein has confirmed that the panel is made of poplar, in keeping with Renaissance practice. The X-ray and infrared scans have also arrived, and I'm pleased to say they support all our earlier theories.
The X-ray shows missing bits of paint, large black areas. So what you're looking at there, Bendor, is the faked layer of overpaint.
Yeah.
And you can see it's confirmed on the X-ray here, where there are large areas missing. And then you can see the smeary layer that covers some of the cracks.
Right.
And as you look closely here, you'll begin to see it all.
Okay, so I can imagine that someone has come along to this picture in the past, substantial damage in the background, and they thought, let's just cover the whole thing up.
The other interesting thing, if you look closely, you'll see that there is a green layer underneath flesh tones.
It's quite unnerving when you look at it up close, because you don't expect to see green flesh.
This pale grey-green is the complementary colour to flesh tones, and was used as a ground layer by artists painting in egg tempera to give an added depth and realism to the skin in a portrait. This was a technique Botticelli employed.
You can see it peeping up from beneath the pink.
Yes.
And that's exactly what you would expect to see for a painting from Botticelli's workshop.
Yes,
How
indeed.
interesting.
Yes.
The X-ray had one final surprise for us. The faint outline of a face that had been drawn on the panel before the painting was begun.
It looks like a Botticelli drawing, doesn't it?
It's got all that Christmas and single line drawing. Yeah.
And it bears no relation to the main composition picture. It's just a tiny little doodle.
Yeah.
And just to think that we're the first people to see that.
Marvellous, isn't it?
In 500 years.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
But anyway, let's go on to the infrared.
The infrared scan will enable us to have a look at the preparatory underdrawing and those clumsy fingers.
So you can see that some of the fingers have been extended, changed shape. You can see the thumb goes underneath the pomegranate.
Oh, yes.
There's a rather nice bump of the thumb.
Yes, there's a whole different shape of the thumb.
Yeah.
Whereas on the picture at the moment, it looks rather like a cocktail sausage. There's no definition to it at all.
No.
Armed with these insights, and with a new confidence that we were on the right track, it was time for the swabs to come out. In consultation with Adam, Cardiff's conservator, we have agreed to leave the later arch and the background with its fake cracks in place, and concentrate on removing old varnish and overpaint from the figures. Seeing the picture again did nothing to help with my scopophilia. She's as beautiful as ever.
You can see the pinks coming through.
Yeah. It's that much more subtle pink as well.
At the start of his career, Botticelli would have used egg as a binding medium for his paint. But by the 1480s, when we think this picture was made, painters in Florence were beginning to paint using oil. For a time, Botticelli used the two techniques together, and there is evidence of both in this picture.
What we're looking at here is a lot of retouching, but the main body of the painting is definitely painted with tempera.
It's all good, it's all good. It's just getting better and better, this picture. Look at the corner of that lip. It's good. You're bringing a picture which is 540 years old back to life. Isn't that something? I don't know if it's the fumes from this. I'm feeling quite emotional.
I love my job. This is a fantastic example of how well something comes back to life again.
With the cleaning progressing so well, I'm going to turn my attention to the painting's provenance. In 1920, the picture was sold to the Davis sisters as a Botticelli by the same man who had so presciently urged them to buy Impressionist works by the likes of Monet and Cézanne. A painter and art dealer called Hugh Blaker, the brother of the sisters' governess. So where did a small-time dealer like Blaker get hold of a Botticelli? Blaker first bought the picture at Christie's in 1915. Madonna and Child, the Virgin, in red and green robes before a semicircular archway. But what's interesting is that it wasn't catalogued as by Botticelli, but by School of Botticelli, which means definitely not the man himself. He paid just £105 for it. So it seems Blaker might have bought himself what we call in the art trade a bit of a sleeper. Now, Blaker lost little time in declaring the picture to be by Botticelli himself, and I've come across a fascinating tale about how he tried to turn a rapid profit. At the time, the big money for European Old Master paintings was being paid in America, and Blaker decided to send his Botticelli to New York to see if he could find a buyer, and he wrote a letter promoting the picture. Now, I used to be an art dealer, but even I would shudder at writing a letter as oleaginous as this. It's really quite something. Dear Sir, may I call your attention to the superb picture, The Madonna and Child, by Sandro Botticelli. This is the only Botticelli for sale in the world. The price, exceedingly moderate considering the importance of the picture, is £16,000. No mention is made here of the fact that Blaker had bought the picture just 6 months earlier for £105. One possible buyer was the noted art dealer Joseph Devine. Now, Devine was interested, but first he wanted to seek the opinion of the world's leading scholar of Renaissance art, Bernard Berenson. Bernard Berenson is a legend in the history of art connoisseurship, and knowing that he had passed judgment on this very painting gives me goosebumps. As a young man, Berenson had a remarkable talent for history and languages and graduated from Harvard University in 1885, quickly becoming one of the most respected scholars of the Italian Renaissance. He made many trips to study art in Italy, paid for by wealthy American collectors, and in 1900 he moved permanently to this ancient farmhouse in the hills outside Florence, the Villa Itati. Kenneth Clark, who worked with him in the 1930s, said, "He was just what the great American middlebrow public was looking for, a sage." So, what about Berenson's reply to Devine's inquiry? What was the judgment of the 20th century's most learned Renaissance scholar on the Cardiff Madonna? This is Bernard Berenson's photographic archive. This was sent by Devine and Co. from New York in June 1917. And we've got here the corresponding letter. It says, "We enclose you a photograph of a Madonna and Child, about which we should be very glad to have your views as to attribution and value, etc., etc." We've got here Berenson's reply from the Devine archive in New York. It says, "Dear Mrs. Devine, in answer of yours, June 28th, I want to say the photograph of a very pretty Madonna from the studio of Botticelli. Should you care to buy it, I would advise you to go up to $5,000 for it." Well, that's significantly more than the £105 that Blaker paid for it in 1915. So how does this move the game on? Well, someone as respected as Bernard Berenson said in 1917 that our painting was certainly from the studio Botticelli. He was judging it from a sepia photograph, but there was something about the quality, perhaps of the face, that caught his eye. All very positive, you'd think. But unfortunately, Berenson's reputation has suffered from his close involvement with Joseph Devine. Devine paid Berenson as much as 30% of the sale price of works on which he had passed judgment. This was a colossal incentive for Berenson to authenticate a painting, and led to criticism that his opinion could be bought. In the case of our painting, whether he stood to gain or not, in 1917 he felt it was a Botticelli studio production, not by a later follower, and that's encouraging progress. But it's not the end of the story. 35 years later, Berenson was presented with the picture again. In 1952,
when the National Museum of Wales was given the painting, they asked Bernard Berenson again for his opinion on who painted it. He replied, saying that he was acquainted with the picture since 1917. But now he goes on to say that the face of the Virgin and the head of the child may have been done by Botticelli himself. So that would suggest something of an upgrade in the attribution. Now today, art historians still view Berenson's connoisseurship with great suspicion. But I have to say, by this point, he'd ended his relationship with Devine, and he wasn't involved in the art market at all. So what we're getting here is his purely academic opinion. Naturally, because I agree with him, I think he's a great sage and a tremendous connoisseur. Our quest to understand our picture is beginning to hinge on the question of whether it's by Botticelli himself, or just came from his studio. So I'm going to visit the National Gallery in London, who have some of the very finest authenticated works by Botticelli in the UK. One of their best is Venus and Mars, and I asked Caroline Campbell to walk us through the picture. First of all, what's going on here? Why does this little Cupid have a huge helmet on his head? Is that supposed to be there?
Well, it's one of the most comic pictures. I think it's such a great representation of how, you know, men and women might feel after love. The god of war, Mars, has lost all his armour and he's so seduced by the goddess Venus. He has fallen asleep in what Botticelli's contemporaries called very decorously the little sleep that happened after lovemaking.
Ah, right, okay.
He can't be woken up by the conch shell blown in his ear. It's just a marvellous painting of the power of love, I think.
And of course what makes the picture work so well is the beauty of his technique.
Mm.
When you look at, say, the Venus's face, what is it about the technique of the painting here that convinces you this is an autographed Botticelli head?
Well, Botticelli trained as a painter in tempera, and that means you had to be incredibly precise, and that any mark you made, you had to be sure it was right. And if you look at her lovely nose, her eyes, it's that combination of precision. And I think just also not just the economy, but the elegance of it is something which for me is very much Botticelli. All the figures are in proportion together. What I think Botticelli is so brilliant at are these outlines, this sense of these really pure forms. They can be translated into any other medium, and that's what made him such an effective master of a workshop, because you could easily take these ideas, and even somebody who wasn't very good could make something that looked very like Botticelli.
Right.
But everything that came out under his workshop's name, he would have had some sort of control over.
To get an idea of how the practice of an artist's workshop today compares to Renaissance Florence, I've come to the industrial hinterland of East London, where Gavin Turk has a busy studio. Gavin's art is concerned with issues of authorship and often plays on his own image.
I think that the first moment I started employing people was more or less when I had my first exhibition.
The assistants working in Botticelli's studio would have been aspiring artists themselves, but seeing Gavin's assistants going through the mundane business of testing power tools, I wondered if that was still the case today.
Yeah, I think most of the people who work here in my studio actually are artists themselves, and when they're not working here, they're working on their own program and their own projects. You know, I think that the idea of working with other people to make my art is almost like part of the art. I mean, you know, I think that I really, for me, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter who makes the art, as long as the art is the art that I think I want it to be. And so some people are going to be much better at doing things, possibly than I am. And I'm also going to be probably good at doing some things that other people aren't. But I certainly want to work with the best possible people to make things to look the best way.
As well as his manipulations of his own image, Gavin has a bit of a thing for eggs and is preparing a 2-ton bronze one for an upcoming exhibition.
I've made about 600 pieces now that have got eggs in them. I'm kind of fairly obsessed with eggs.
So with a piece like this, how much of it would you have kind of made with your own hands, and how much has been made by workshop assistants?
I've really not touched this sculpture very much, although I have had a hand in some sanding at some point.
And how aware do you think the people who buy your art are of how collaborative the process is?
I think that people who buy art are very varied in terms of their actual knowledge or experience of the process of making art. I think that some of them live in the mindset that the artist has literally coveted and made and done everything that they see before them. And then obviously there's the other side of it where, you know, some collectors really are very kind of aware that it's a very kind of like distant touch.
So it would seem nothing much has changed since Botticelli's studio was turning out Madonnas in the 15th century. As long as there's a demand for beautiful things, the buyers don't ask too many questions.
So, Gavin Turk, creative genius or quality control at the end of the process?
Oh, definitely both, creative genius and quality controller.
If our Madonna is by Botticelli, it would have been painted in the 1480s, after he returned from Rome, when his workshop was one of the busiest in Florence. But the last years of the 15th century were a restless time in the city. In 1492, Botticelli's patron, Lorenzo de' Medici, died at the young age of 43. By his deathbed were his favourite painter, Michelangelo, and a Dominican friar who administered the last rites, Girolamo Savonarola. It is said that at the moment of Lorenzo's death, the Duomo was struck by lightning. There was a mood of superstitious foreboding, and the charismatic monk Savonarola became famous by playing on these fears.
People were convinced that the world would end in 1500. The city was gripped by guilt and remorse, and they were whipped up into a fervour by Savonarola, who preached fiery sermons of repentance from his pulpit in the Duomo.
Botticelli, who had always had a religious streak, fell heavily under his spell. Under Savonarola's influence, the Florentines finally turned against the Medici, who were deposed and banished. Savonarola took hold of their hearts and minds, vowing that if they rejected their love of earthly treasures, Florence would become the New Jerusalem.
As part of his religious showmanship, Savonarola organised giant conflagrations here in the Piazza della Signoria, the famous bonfires of the vanities, and onto these were cast the worthless trinkets of a society gone rotten.
The very foundations of Renaissance culture were under attack. Un-Christian pictures that portrayed ancient, pagan, Greek and Roman subjects like Botticelli's Birth of Venus were condemned. Botticelli is said to have thrown some of his own works into the flames. This dark mood changed Botticelli's art. His pictures became mysterious and apocalyptic, like the mystic crucifixion. In the background, Florence is threatened by the fires of hell as burning torches rain from the sky. But Savonarola's grip on the city was brief. Florence's ruling classes resented his religious tyranny, and in 1498 he was arrested, tried, and burnt at the stake here in the piazza where Botticelli had thrown his own pictures on the bonfire of the vanities. The city's merchants and bankers got back into the business of making money again. Her artists once more felt able to seek inspiration from classical mythology. The Renaissance was about to achieve its greatest triumphs.
It seems Botticelli, though, never recovered. Very little work survives from his last years, and it's said that he became a beggar and survived on handouts. I prefer to remember him as the artistic genius who made magical paintings of beautiful people.
But perhaps I'm just a hopeless scopophiliac. Simon has now completed the work on the painting, and I've decided there is no cure for what ails me. I'm every bit as besotted by the beauty of our Madonna as I was when I first saw her.
What do you think?
I'm actually speechless. Normally I'm speechless when you give me the bill, but this is just knockout.
It works, doesn't it?
It works. That's it, actually. That's the word. It works. And the modelling, the flesh tones, the subtlety of the contours of the face.
Yeah.
That's what Botticelli does, isn't it?
Yeah, this is exactly what it is. I particularly love those reflections in the dark side of the face, which give that 3 dimensions to the whole object.
Oh, there are so many good bits, aren't there? Oh, we can see them now for the first time in centuries.
The restoration has transformed the painting. It's as if a veil has been lifted, and the purity of the Madonna's countenance is shining through once more. The colour is back in the chubby cheeks of the Christ child, and even the pomegranate has a new succulence. The National Gallery are a leading authority on Botticelli in the UK, but they have a policy of not commenting on works that are not in their collection. So we've devised a Plan B.
There is, in Yale, in America, Larry Cantor, the director of the Yale Museum of Art, is widely regarded as a world-leading Botticelli specialist, and we can't show him the picture because he's based in the States, but we're going to send him a dossier and images and see what he says.
The work Simon has done has brought this painting back to life, and certainly to see the faces cleaned and restored gives me great hope that Botticelli himself played some part in its creation. I've put together all the results of our labours, the scientific investigations, and the various records of the picture's provenance, and I'm emailing it to Lawrence Cantor in the States to get his opinion.
The sun was shining when we returned the painting to Cardiff to the National Museum of Wales. A good turnout of staff and friends of the gallery had come to see the results of the restoration.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here. This is a very special painting. It seems to have particularly had quite a profound effect on Bendor, and I don't know that I've ever known him to be so in love with a painting. Is that fair to say?
I think it probably is fair to say. Shall we show everybody why?
Yes. Let's reveal.
This is the oldest painting we've ever worked on. And Simon took, what, 3 months, 4 months?
It felt like 10 years. And she's sorely missed, yeah. I used to long going in and having breakfast with her in the morning.
We have been able to send all the images and all the information, all the evidence we've gathered to a world-renowned Botticelli expert who's called Larry Cantor, Lawrence Cantor. He's the chief curator at the Yale Art Gallery in the United States. And I have here in my pocket an email. He says, clearly, this painting came from Botticelli's studio. Probably, Botticelli himself is responsible for more than a bit of it. A great deal more study is needed to solve the riddles of how much, what parts, why, and when. For Botticelli, all these are essential questions to be answered. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We're quite pleased with that, given the circumstances and the condition of the picture.
It's good to know that far from being an unimportant copy, the Cardiff Madonna may well be the picture Gwendolyn Davies thought it was. Painted in Botticelli's workshop, with parts of it done by Botticelli himself.
So this is a story to be continued, but there's much more that colleagues like Adam can do here at Cardiff to take the story onto the next level. I think she's looking absolutely beautiful, and it's for you to judge, really, whether you think it's all by Botticelli or a workshop piece. I know what I think. And I think it's a great image, and I hope you all enjoy having it on the walls here in Cardiff.
We're delighted. In the time I've been here, we haven't been able to display this painting. I think it's such a dramatic change once we can remove all the horrible old varnish and all the horrible old restoration, and we're very pleased.
There's a question mark over another painting bequeathed by the Davies sisters to Cardiff. Bought as an El Greco, It's now thought to be a workshop copy.